Chapter 481. A trembling sensation swept across his skin like a wave. From his scalp to his fingertips, it was as if he had been electrified. Luo Nan's mental senses and the living starry sky were simultaneously activated by this stimulation. They broke through the cramped passageway and extended and danced within the complex environment of the building. He was like a spider spinning a web or a bat emitting sound waves. But He Yuan suddenly said to the side, "Someone's catching up to us." Luo Nan raised his head in a daze. He didn't understand how He Yuan's senses were more timely and accurate than his. Someone has intruded into the tunnel without permission. He Yuan added a reason. Then the surveillance footage was shared in the mission channel. Luo Nan saw a young man who seemed to be a hip-hop biker. He was riding his high-horsepower motorcycle, rumbling as he charged into the private tunnel. Since he didn't possess legal authority, his own wristband issued him a stern warning. The young man didn't react to this at all. The speed of the motorcycle he was riding on suddenly dropped in the next moment. The SCA's AI system had taken over the motorcycle. The direction and throttle were locked down. The motorcycle's speed began to drop rapidly until it came to a complete stop. But the young biker had no expression on his face. He just got off the motorcycle. Not only did he abandon the motorcycle, he even tore off his wristband and threw it away. Then he ran madly towards the depths of the tunnel. Of course, the most important thing was the zero feedback from the living starry sky. This made Luo Nan instantly understand the identity of this person. Ability user's clone body. 3 seconds later, the people on the transport vehicle saw this young biker begin to crazily run alone at a speed of over 60 kilometers per hour. Moreover, as time passed, his speed continued to increase. In the end, he only used about a minute to force his way into the building's cargo passageway. As for the passageway being closed due to the unauthorized opening, the biker smashed in with a single punch. The cargo passageway already had an upward slope at this time. The young biker's figure leaned forward. Later on, he simply used both his hands and feet. He was like a vicious wolf on the hunt, more like a human. Speed of 90 kilometers per hour. Estimated contact in 75 seconds. God didn't ask if they should speed up. This was because the current situation was that even if they accelerated to tarmac 76, this hungry wolf in human form would have ample time to block the group of people before they boarded the plane. Fighting a battle on the tarmac would only fulfill the other side's wishes. Cat Eyes furrowed her brows as she looked at He Yuan. This kind of speed consumes an enormous amount of energy. With this rate of consumption, if he can still maintain his combat strength, he should be much stronger than Little Yu. He Yuan's gaze turned to Luo Nan. "Mr. Luo, what do you mean?" The straight-line distance between the two was less than a kilometer as they spiraled upward through the passageway. There was no need for the living starry sky to intervene. They had entered the range of Luo Nan's mental senses. Luo Nan carefully observed for a while, but in the end he could only shake his head. "Individually, I don't feel any changes. But, the overall atmosphere is terrible." Luo Nan really could not think of a more accurate description. Although the most threatening target had already appeared, in his eyes this biker gang was only the tip of a spear. Behind him, there was a huge curtain of darkness that had already spread out, and it was gradually shrinking. However, his psychic senses and the living starry sky still couldn't capture its exact shape. He Yuan nodded in understanding, then ordered, "Delay the interception." God opened the back door of the transport vehicle the moment the order was issued. He tossed out a few tactical grenades in succession, including a powerful defensive grenade. The grenade had a delay and remote control function set. Due to the large curvature and slope of the passageway, the grenade rumbled as soon as it hit the ground. The biker gang on the other side of the passageway seemed to be unaware of this. They continued to advance like a hurricane. He Yuan didn't wait for the result. She walked straight to the front of the vehicle and stuck her back to the metal partition. Simple mechanical arms extended out from both sides as the scanning light fell. They stuck to He Yuan's body, installing and splicing metal components together. If one only looked at He Yuan, the metal components were like a special life form. They followed along her body, spreading up and down. They extended from her shoulders to her chest, her arms, her waist, her legs, and finally covered her face. This was undoubtedly the exoskeleton armor of a deep blue walker. This was the first time Luo Nan saw the entire process of a deep blue walker being armed. He was a bit stupefied for a time. The entire process was extremely quick. In the end, it didn't take more than 15 seconds. The current He Yuan had already transformed into a vicious killing machine armed with steel. The special metal on her body reacted with the format of fire, producing a sea-like deep blue radiance. It also seemed to have a rhythm of breathing, gorgeous and dazzling. He Yuan walked down the equipment platform after the exoskeleton was properly installed. She instructed in a deep voice. Plan number 4. Abandon the vehicle if necessary. God and Si Guosheng responded in unison. He Yuan nodded to Luo Nan once more. She then pushed open the door of the vehicle and leaped up gracefully. She flipped to the top of the vehicle and crouched down quietly. Yes. No one believed that a few tactical grenades could eliminate the biker gang behind them. The battle had yet to begin. Another 20 seconds or so passed before a muffled explosion rang out in the lane. The tactical grenades that had slid down exploded one after another, including the most destructive defensive grenades. The shrapnel covered the entire passageway in an instant, causing the area to become unrecognizable. The surveillance camera was destroyed in an instant as well. The shared image of the mission channel was cut off. But before the image was cut off, everyone saw the biker gang's body slam to the side. Before the tactical grenades could unleash their killing power, the biker gang had forcibly smashed through a wall to the other side of the lane. The biker gang's speed increased explosively once more as soon as his hands and feet landed on the ground. It was so fast that it was hard for the high-definition camera to capture his figure. Luckily, Luo Nan reacted at this time. He promptly took over the surveillance mission and warned everyone. 400 meters. 300 meters. 200 meters. He suddenly let out a muffled groan. A mental attack that came from an unknown direction exploded over, distorting his mental senses. It was as if a dark curtain had covered his head and face, causing him to lose his lock onto the target for a short period of time. The attack came suddenly, but compared to Luo Nan's powerful accumulation of soul strength, it was just like smashing a rock in the center of the lake. Though it was turbulent, it was fundamentally unhindered. Luo Nan quickly recovered. Then another loud rumble rang out in front of the moving transport vehicle within this buffer space. The wall burst open, and a huge amount of cement and baffle fragments splashed out with a whooshing sound. He Yuan, who was on top of the vehicle, pounced towards the area the moment the wall burst open. Her entire body was like a sharp blade piercing through the air under the auxiliary acceleration of the exoskeleton. The driver and co-driver were both elites of Luo Nan's security team. Things happened in a rush, but they were busy and not chaotic. The transport vehicle suddenly moved to the side, but it was unavoidable for it to crash into a wall on the other side due to the narrow lane. The vehicle rubbed against the wall, creating patches of sparks, but the vehicle continued to rumble forward. Luo Nan and Cat Eye's level of physical skills were displayed within the vehicle. Though the vibration was endless, the two were able to maintain their balance. God and Si Guosheng adopted defensive postures, ensuring that the equipment and junk within the vehicle wouldn't cause damage to the two unarmored personnel. 47 kilometers per hour. Careful! The transport vehicle, which had been moving at a speed of close to 50 kilometers per hour, suddenly dropped to zero before Luo Nan's voice could fall. The sound of an explosion reached their ears. It was sharp and had a strange inflection to it. At this moment, a force squeezed over from the side. The terrifying force slammed the vehicle, which weighed several tons, into the wall. The vehicle didn't move an inch within a second. The only ones who were shaken were Luo Nan's group within the vehicle. The power of inertia was terrifying. The driver and co-driver in front were pushed forward by the powerful force in the first instance. Even though they were wearing seatbelts, it was hard to avoid colliding with the steering wheel and the control console. They were instantly injured. Even if Luo Nan's horse stance was 10 times more solid within the vehicle, it would be impossible for him to stabilize his figure at this time. He and Cat Eyes threw themselves forward, and a dazzling electric fire exploded in front of them. The simple deep blue walker equipment was the first to explode. The bursting fragments welcomed their arrival. At this time, God and Si Guosheng, the two deep blue walkers, exerted force at the same time. The format of fire transformed into a translucent flaming blade that chopped down towards the vehicle's baffle in front. The metal baffle ruptured, and the upper part of the driver's compartment exploded into pieces. God and Si Guosheng forcibly chopped down the obstruction in front of them, opening up a path to dispel the power of inertia. Luo Nan and Cat Eyes flew out of the vehicle, as if they were riding on clouds and mist. They flew out of the driver's compartment that was beyond recognition, and the temperature within the vehicle rapidly rose the instant they left the vehicle. This was not the power of the format of fire. The powerful and malevolent source of heat came from outside the vehicle. In that instant, the special police transport vehicle, which was molded from high-strength alloy, seemed to deform in the high temperature of the air. God and Si Guosheng's slashes were meant to help the driver and co-driver break free, but the two's reactions were a step too slow. They screamed miserably within the suddenly rising temperature of the air. It was unknown whether they were dead or alive. Luo Nan's mind was still clear. Or perhaps it could be said that he had entered his peak state under the high-intensity stimulation. He landed on the ground with a standard quick recover under God's protection. He rolled a few times before getting up. When he looked back, he saw He Yuan fighting with the biker gang. But the feeling of this scene was completely different from when he had fought against Xiaoyu earlier. It was as if an incorporeal furnace had been set up outside the biker gang's body. Surging streams of heat roiled and churned within. Their fighting style had completely changed. Luo Nan was no longer using his fleshly body to erupt. Instead, he used his fleshly body as a fulcrum to pry up an enormous amount of energy, and change the form of energy to deal damage to the target. This was similar to the burner in this aspect. They were both a branch of the fleshly body, but it was an extremely high-end type. Of all the ability users that Luo Nan had encountered, only Fairchild's Shield of Truth was similar to this situation, aside from the burner. In addition, Mo Luan's Dark Soul body involved the interference and transformation of the mental into the material. Though the nature was different, the characteristics were quite similar. Chapter 482. No matter what level of power the opponent was, the opponent must have learned from the lesson with Xiaoyu last time by changing his fighting style. He must have avoided self-destruction due to the extreme eruption of his fleshly body. But Luo Nan always felt that it was not that simple. After all, consumption was consumption, no matter what kind of consumption it was. It was all paid out by this fleshly body. True ability users were able to obtain a longer standby time due to the coordination of body and soul. The mind and fleshly body interfered with each other. There was a rhythm to mediate between the rise and fall. This was the natural weakness of the clone body, but the opponent must have used some sort of method to make up for it. Luo Nan felt that it was extremely odd from the beginning. On the surface, it was a motorcycle gang. But behind the motorcycle gang, an incorporeal net had long since spread open. A turbid curtain of darkness was propped up, and the thing that formed the curtain of darkness seemed to be drawing closer. Luo Nan didn't have much time to observe. Cat Eyes grabbed him and walked up the ramp. Si Guosheng was in front and God was behind, providing cover. Behind them, the motorcycle gang and He Yuan's battle had already smashed the upper and lower passageways full of holes. The electrical circuits and lighting equipment were the first to suffer. Under the powerful impact of the furnace-style heat, the degree of destruction was more thorough than at the Tonghui building. Soon, this cargo passageway could only be illuminated by the deep blue walker's body and the bursting flames of the battle. The battlefield where the two experts fought was not limited to the cargo passageway. He Yuan's deep blue walker's arclight blade burst out as Luo Nan's group ran wildly toward the parking apron. It forced the motorcycle gang to break through the outer wall and into the office area on the right side of the cargo passageway. And a short second later, the roaring heat wave tore apart another wall. It practically scraped God's helmet, collapsing the back of the passageway into ruins. Fortunately, today was the weekend. It was late, and there were few people in the building. No one suffered for the time being. But if this were to continue, it would only be a matter of time before the entire building was destroyed. Considering the aftermath of the battle between Tianbang and Mo Luan a few days ago, Why do I always encounter this kind of freak who demolishes everything with his bare hands when I'm with you? Cat Eye's breathing became a bit hurried. The temperature within the passageway kept rising. The consumption of physical strength was secondary. What was worse was the chaotic aura that shuttled back and forth. It constantly stimulated and interfered with her. It was extremely troublesome for an ability user like her who specialized in mental senses. Luonan kept his head down and didn't say anything. He just sprinted with 1 foot high and 1 foot low. Just when Cat Eyes thought that her complaints would not be heard again, a voice suddenly rang in her ears. Did you see that? Ah. They're all here, and they're very fast. They must have used some sort of concealment method just now. Hey, speak clearly. Luonan turned his head to look at her. He was finally able to get a bit out of his own logic. I'm saying 70 meters away, inside the ventilation duct. Yes, the one on the left. 70 meters just so happened to be within the range of Cat Eye's mental senses. She focused her attention and quickly discovered her target. Rat. Not only were they rats, but they were also identical to the nest-born rats in the Tonghui Building's underground tunnel. The largest one was no bigger than 2 or 3 knuckles. Its entire body was gray and it had sharp teeth and claws. At this time, there were 7 or 8 rats like this in the ventilation duct. They were moving quickly in the duct like a gray stream. Also, these gray rats did not only appear in the left ventilation duct. Under Luonan's reminder, Cat Eyes discovered that several hundred similar rats had already been stuffed into the surroundings of the cargo corridor they were in at some unknown time within the range of her mental senses. They appeared in various areas of the cargo corridor up, down, left, and right. Most importantly, there was still an unending stream of rats pouring in, indicating that there were many, many more in the periphery. Has this place already been installed with a nest? Maybe. Maybe it's more than that. It's still that ventilation duct. Look further ahead. At this time, Cat Eye's long-range sensing ability came into play. She took advantage of the situation to reduce the range of her all-encompassing senses. She extended the length of her soul strength, probing feelers. Under Luonan's guidance, she extended it all the way to 200 meters, all the way to the entrance of the same floor as the ventilation duct. Along the way, she saw at least 4 or 5 bloodstains and meat paste smeared within the duct. From the scope and details of the contamination in these few locations, she could tell that there were at least 3 to 5 rats in each location. Their bodies had exploded and flesh and blood splattered everywhere. What does this mean? Just as Cat Eyes was observing from afar, another explosion rang out from within the cargo passageway. He Yuan and the biker gang carried out another wave of collision. A terrifying energy jet destroyed the structure of the passageway within a radius of 20 meters, causing a small-scale collapse. The flying rubble smashed against the god exoskeleton armor at the back, producing banging sounds. Luonan requested Cat Eyes to pay attention. Look over there. Look at these rats. There was no need for Luonan's reminder right now. Cat Eyes could see at least 20 rats within the range of her senses. They instantly exploded in every direction, flesh and blood splattering everywhere. But soon, several times the number of rats came in from various passageways to replenish their numbers, consumables, and their scapegoats. The connection between the clone body and the rats is quite tight. The range and depth of Luonan's senses surpassed Cat Eyes by quite a bit. Earlier, his senses had been disrupted by the opponent using some sort of method, causing him to lose his sensitivity. But now that the two sides were in direct confrontation, the disruptive dark screen had lost its effectiveness. He quickly captured the internal connections between the numerous matters from beginning to end. From his perspective, the wave upon wave of the rat tide was the most crucial key to victory and defeat in this entire battle. Between them and the motorcycle gang, there were thousands of incorporeal passageways constructed from soul strength that interweaved into a net. They formed the disruptive dark screen from before, and they also formed the buffer net for the transfer of energy. The reason why there was such a huge difference between the two ability users' clones, the motorcycle gangs and Xiaoyos, lay in the fact that the former's pure energy circulation method was more beneficial to the transfer of powerful energy. It was more beneficial to the consumption and damage that occurred when the powerful energy erupted. The price actually existed at all times. It was just that the rats on the periphery became the scapegoats. From this point of view, as long as the rats didn't die out completely, the motorcycle gang's ability to continue fighting wouldn't be a problem. I need to eliminate all of these rats. Luo Nan was unable to think of any exquisite ideas in a short amount of time. He could only think in a straightforward manner. Cat Eyes could more or less understand Luo Nan's way of thinking, but she felt that it was quite funny to think about these things when they were fleeing with great difficulty. Don't make the problem childish, okay? Mr. Deep Blue Walkers who are armed to the teeth, how do you two estimate it? How do you deal with over 1,000 rats within a radius of 200, no 500 meters in a few dozen seconds? Thanks to the mental and material image conversion function of the psychic wave network, God and Si Guosheng were able to receive a portion of the perceptual scene shared by Luo Nan and Cat Eyes. They weren't completely baffled. Right now, the two veteran burners could see thousands of gray rat silhouettes piled up like a great tide. They followed the road network and pipelines that extended in all directions of the building. They pushed forward layer by layer. Perhaps a few dozen of their own kind had exploded into a bloody paste just a moment ago, but the ones behind them stepped over the broken limbs and flesh of their own kind to continue forward. But it was also this group of rats. Practically not a single one of them would enter within a 50-meter radius. They constantly dashed and shifted, feverishly sacrificing themselves while knowing to seek advantages and avoid disadvantages. It was as if there was an awe-inspiring and orderly collective consciousness that led their overall actions. The more comprehensive the perceptual scene, the more one could feel the terrifying power within. God answered with a hoarse voice. Old C and I have an effective attack radius of 30 meters. Our limit is 50 meters. We can't reach them at all. And the building is their natural cover. They are separated by floors and walls. Unless it's a destructive attack against the building, it will be very difficult to pose a threat to them. In other words, it would be very difficult for the two of them to display their greatest combat strength when facing the rat tide. Looking at the coincidental division of the range, these were certainly within the scope of their opponent's considerations. Cat Eyes gave Luo Nan a sidelong glance. Her meaning was, "Do you understand?" Luo Nan cast his gaze over. His pupils sparkled within the darkness. Then there are only two people left who can pose a threat to these rats. Yes, two people who possessed the mental side of long-range perception. Cat Eyes and Luo Nan himself. You can have the radius of 100 meters. Leave the periphery to me. Rather than saying this was a discussion, it was better to say that it was an order. My perceptual radius is only 70 meters. That's still within 100 meters. My destructive interference just barely passed. It's enough to deal with rats. I don't need to be like a sniper who kills with one shot. The more lenient Luo Nan's response was, the more Cat Eyes found it unbearable. Actually, the two of them were quite clear in their minds. Cat Eyes' perceptual radius was not just 70 meters. Her destructive interference was not to the extent that it could not even put down rats. However, Cat Eyes instinctively displayed a lack of confidence when faced with the hundreds and thousands of rat tide, the illusory pressure transfer network, and Luo Nan himself. She was a pessimist to begin with. However, Luo Nan had already entered the circle of his own logic. All of her psychological changes were not included in the scope of his consideration. It was normal for young people to measure others by their own standards. Cat Eyes knew the problem with Luo Nan's way of thinking. But the more she understood, the more she felt the pain of being completely crushed. Needless to say, this was just a meaningless stab in confirmation. Essentially speaking, as a believer, she had to keep up with the rhythm of a god. She had to follow the orders of a god. Everything else was meaningless. Cat Eyes' teeth streaked across her lower lip, leaving behind a faint white mark. She purposely revealed a smile. Selling my life. I admit it. In the next second, a rat's head exploded in the ventilation duct that Luo Nan had led her to earlier. The rat fell to the ground and twitched. At nearly the same time, the rat beside it exploded into a mist of blood. It was the same death, but the method of death was different. The difference was not big, but it was not small either. But in the end, a certain amount of accumulation was needed to manifest itself. Cat Eyes shot a cold glance at Luo Nan. Though she did not say anything, her meaning was clear. Chapter 483. Keep going. Luo Nan indicated for Cat Eyes to continue. He did not make his move immediately. Instead, he observed Cat Eye's situation. Cat Eye's self-evaluation was basically in line with reality. She belonged to the intuitive critical strike style, and she excelled in explosively killing a single target in a flash of inspiration. If he succeeded, he would be like an immortal, as if he could ignore the distance between time and space and be unpredictable. However, this method consumed a lot of energy, and the difference between the peaks and troughs was obvious. It was very difficult to achieve precise mechanical control. Against the rat tide that was coming from all directions, killing a single target was like trying to put out a burning cart of firewood with a cup of water. Cat Eyes was truly lacking in the crucial aspect of sustainability. Her first 2 strikes were able to kill accurately, but her 3rd strike was a little off. Her 4th, 5th, and 6th strikes were even worse. She only managed to adjust to the 7th strike. There was about a 3-second gap in between, which could be considered a rhythm of ups and downs. After 2 waves of attacks, the tide of rats that surged within 100 meters did not decrease. Instead, it increased. The pressure on Cat Eyes was as great as a mountain. The motorcycle gang was in pursuit from behind, and Hiyuan's destructive battle could bring disaster to the fish in the moat at any time. On her side, not only did she have to ensure accuracy, she also had to ensure efficiency. All of these were things that Cat Eyes was least proficient in. This was not a problem of attitude, nor was it a problem of ability. It was a problem of whether or not he could adapt. It was already not easy for her to maintain her rhythm. Luo Nan noticed that the t-shirt beneath Cat Eye's open top was already soaked with sweat in just a few short seconds. The sweat stuck to her body. If this continued, her legs would go weak before they even reached the landing pad. This was a command error. Luo Nan immediately reacted. Let's adjust a bit. We'll cooperate. I'll be in charge of cleaning up the perimeter, and you'll be in charge of filling in the gaps. What are you investigating? Cat Eyes shouted with a hoarse voice. Right now, she was nearly driven insane by the rat tide. She was unable to pay attention to Luo Nan's performance. She was in a nervous and focused state. Giving Luo Nan a response was giving him face. We don't care about the 100-meter range. No, we don't care about the 70-meter range. Just deal with the 50-70-meter range. Deal with our left flank. Luo Nan pulled Cat Eyes with a backhand, helping her shift her center of gravity. The 60 to 70 meters are mine. The 50 to 60 meters are yours. You just need to deal with the ones that crash into the inner circle. What will you do? Don't worry about me. The memory of the structural skeleton of the dripping sword had already triggered Luo Nan's instincts as he spoke. Luo Nan used his instincts to drive his soul strength. Just like writing a familiar character, the condensation ring and the 5 auxiliary structures, amplification, acceleration, sharpening, explosion, and guidance, were like 6 strokes that formed a complete character with a single stroke. With a single thought, a complete character was constructed. Using the intent as a pen, one could write and draw, one could carve, and one could sculpt. When used on Luo Nan, who was a precision-oriented and mentally inclined ability user, there was an exquisite and tight-knit feeling of the intent reaching the form, and the intent leaving the form. Though the pressure on Cat Eyes was as great as a mountain right now, she was still able to sense Luo Nan's thoughts overflowing and leaving a mark in the void. And Luo Nan chose to use 3 seconds as a tempo interval for the sake of matching her tempo. Within these 3 seconds, the structural skeletons of the 15 dripping swords were engraved into the void. They absorbed the water molecules in the air, condensing into beads of water. Just as the water droplets appeared, the micron-scale structure of the water drop sword had already spread out in the void. Compared to the 15 water droplets, there were more than 5 times or even 10 times more. Cat Eyes made a rare mistake in her peak state. She was only able to blow apart half the body of a mouse. Luo Nan turned his head very keenly. Tired? Just as he turned his head, 15 blossoms of blood sprayed out at nearly the same time. They burst apart at the same time. An equal number of mice fell to the ground and twitched. Blood splashed from their pupils and brain juice flowed out. Then came the second wave, the third wave. Luo Nan and the others were running with all their might. The splashing water droplets and blood basically formed an elongated arc of a fan. It was like an incorporeal blade cutting through the air. Wherever the arc of water light passed, the surging and leaping shadows of mice fell to the ground in rows. The way they died could not be considered particularly tragic. The water droplets penetrated their brains and exploded. There was very little blood. Only the mice could be seen twitching on the ground. But such a simple way of dying had a treacherous and sinister coldness akin to a witchcraft curse. Cat Eyes had clearly guessed the method within, but she still needed to confirm it. The dripping sword? Yes. The speed of this move is all right. Luo Nan responded in passing, but he was still observing and evaluating in his mind. As they were cleaning up the mice, the motorcycle gang was constantly competing with them in hand speed. From time to time, a mist of blood would explode from within the rat tide. The frequency of this was extremely high. But in any case, no matter how complete the corpses of the mice that Luo Nan and Cat Eyes had dealt with earlier were, they would not explode again. His estimations were more or less the same. Though there was a high probability that these mice were products of the clone virus, their corresponding abundant life force was a necessary item to form the pressure transfer network. In other words, the motorcycle gang wanted live mice. Dead mice were worthless. Luo Nan had walked the right path. The problem was that the lethality of the dripping sword could not achieve immediate results when compared to the endless rat tide. He still had some spare energy. He could increase the frequency of the dripping sword. But when he thought about it carefully, there were some cumbersome details in the specific process that dragged down his attack speed. As Luo Nan attacked in waves, he pondered. The clone virus mice within the rat tide were all physically strong. And the stronger they were, the more developed the secretion function of their glands was. The density of water molecules between their eyes, mouth, and nose was relatively higher. The temperature was also higher than the surrounding environment. As long as his mental senses locked onto these warm and humid areas, he could directly erect the structural skeleton of the dripping sword. He could condense water to form a whole body, and he could directly strike the dripping sword into the weakest areas of the mice. And in this way, the three auxiliary structures of range increase, acceleration, and guidance could be eliminated. It was enough as long as the sharpening and explosion effects were preserved. Also, since this was an urgent method, the dripping sword would explode as soon as it was formed. There was no need to rigidly adhere to the precision and stability of the structure. Luo Nan's thoughts spun a few times, and the structure of the dripping sword underwent minute changes wherever his thoughts went. Though the amount of mental energy placed on each structural skeleton was small, there was a qualitative change when they converged together. It was like calligraphy, changing from regular script to cursive. The square and strict characters instantly flowed and danced. Fine. Actually, the dripping sword, which didn't need a stable structure, was simply too cool to throw. Luo Nan and his party ran out 200 meters in the next half a minute. And at the same time, at least 500 dripping swords were thrown out like splashing water. The corpses of mice were thrown out in the left wing area of the squad. It didn't matter if these mice were hidden in the pipes, in the corners of the walls, in the crevices, or under the tables and chairs. But as long as they breathed, a bead of water would always appear around their faces. Then it would pierce straight into their vitals. Luo Nan's dripping sword was thrown more and more casually, but the effects were getting better and better. In the end, he nearly forgot about the technique of the dripping sword. He just locked onto the corresponding area with his thoughts. It was like a stroke of a pen, leaving behind incomplete traces. 3 seconds later, the water vapor would condense into a bead, and the bead would enter the eyes, enter the brain, and explode to claim their lives. During this process, there were mice that would explode into a bloody mist from time to time without any warning. Their vitality was used by the biker gang to vent their pressure. But on the left wing, within the area of 100 meters, the density of mice finally began to clearly drop. This was especially true in the area from 50 to 60 meters. Cat Eyes was there to check and fill in the gaps. This woman was getting more and more on the right track. Her performance was becoming more and more savage. The scattered mice that crashed into this area all had their heads explode. They died without a complete corpse, completely clearing out this area. In the end, Luonan didn't even notify Cat Eyes. He expanded the 70-meter defensive line outward until it reached 200 meters. At the same time, he filled in a semicircle in the direction of the right wing, forming a complete strangulation circle. When he discovered, his thoughts stirred. When he thought about it, he drew his pen and seized his life. It felt great, right? But after firing a few rounds in a row, no one could escape the feeling of emptiness. The consumption of Luonan's mental strength was considerable. Luonan remembered that he once viewed the large-scale splashing of dripping swords as pouring milk. It wasn't without reason. And more importantly, it was too dry and dull. Right now, Luonan viewed this process in a different way. From his perspective, he was no longer hunting and killing targets. Instead, he was using his mental senses to weave a net. He was using a special form to interfere with specific areas of the material world. These areas were where the mouths and noses of the mice drooled. The form of interference was the dripping sword. A specific form in a specific area formed the results he needed. It was like a simple equation. But looking at it this way, his overall method of interference was still clumsy. It was just a copy and paste method without any technical content. It was still a manual operation. Yes, on the plane of reality, there were still 3 seconds of time for the water droplets to condense. It was quite annoying. Many times, Luonan had already succeeded. But because the water droplets had yet to condense and take form, the motorcycle gang was the first to explode their targets. Otherwise, Luonan's battle results would have increased by 20 to 30%. There must be a more efficient method. There must be. Humans were always lazy by nature. When faced with large amounts of repetitive work and repetitive problems, they would always consider using a simple method to completely solve the related problems. Luonan was not an exception. But before he could think through it thoroughly, a few rounds of dripping swords passed. The rat tied within 200 meters of the left and right wings had become scattered and sparse, faster than he had anticipated. It was the same when he pushed further into the periphery. Only now did Luonan discover that the motorcycle gang had already urged the rat tide to move to the side and rear. Moreover, they had pulled the team to a distance of 200 meters. It was very clear that the other side had felt the disturbance brought about by the large amount of losses in the rat tide. And this disturbance was very annoying. It's effective. God, who was covering the rear, was able to see the direction of the rat tide's movement clearly through thermal imaging and other sensing equipment. He clearly let out a long breath. But he still found it a bit hard to believe. This kind of sweeping efficiency. How did they kill them later on? Mr. Luo, your protective suit has entered interference mode. Did the president make a move? Ha! Luonan was stunned. He subconsciously pressed his chest lightly. Sure enough, his chest armor was slightly hot. He checked the relevant records of the mission channel. Sure enough, the hexa ear had already automatically switched to the X frequency band. Chapter 484. The Lilan district was located in the eastern part of Xia City. It was one of the secondary centers of the city. In the middle of its main business district, the Shangding Triad high-rise office buildings were located here. There were many high-rise buildings around the office building, and the floor area ratio was so high that the low-rise areas below the 18th floor of the building only matched the surrounding environment when the lights were turned on at night. This area belonged to the Xia City branch of the Wilderness Explorers Society. Although there was a severe lack of lighting and the air was hardly fresh, many members of the association still liked to come here when they had nothing to do. After all, on the 13th floor of the Shangding building, in a large laboratory that occupied the entire floor, there was a veteran otaku. He was also a veteran ability user and extraordinary. He was the president of the Xia City branch, Ouyang Chen. President Ouyang himself was not very sociable. He was always hiding in the laboratory. One might not even see his shadow for 10 days or half a month. But if people mustered up enough courage and could come up with valuable questions to ask, they would often gain something. Of course, people had to be clear about what was free time and what was busy. For example, tonight, there was no fool who dared to trouble President Ouyang. Since an hour ago, the outside world had been continuously sending some materials into the biological laboratory in the West Tower. Dozens of researchers and experimental assistants were seizing the time to analyze and characterize the relevant materials. It was a busy scene. Clone number 1 is here. Send it to the control panel immediately. Why are you only here now? It had been almost half an hour since the suspected gene sample had been delivered. By the way, report the extraction progress. The console will see the results soon. At present, we have extracted some of the gene fragments, but we have not found the complete DNA. The specific report has just been sent. Has the guild leader signed for it? The president is at the main building's maintenance team. All right. Compared to the biology team, the maintenance team located in the main building area was responsible for the construction and maintenance of the global psychic wave network. This was the true backbone of the laboratory, and it was also responsible for the main business of the laboratory. The vast majority of the 50 or so people in the squad might not be considered experts, but without them, the psychic wave network, which covered the entirety of Xia City and even several important regions of the world, could collapse at any time. The person in charge of the biology team was also helpless. Don't forget to urge the chairman to sign it. In addition, another clone had arrived. In order to prevent enemy infiltration, the maintenance team had to send people to reconfirm the isolation of the psychic wave network. If something goes wrong, the guild leader will have to clean up the mess. Oh, what about this? The lab assistant showed the bag in his hand that had just been extracted. It was in good condition but had no value in the laboratory. Seal it up first. We'll wait for the president to come and do an in-depth examination. The assistant made an okay gesture, sealed the bag into a sterile bag, marked it, and put it aside. At this point, the short period of communication caused by the transfer of the clone body ended, and everyone in the biological group once again began their endless tests and experiments. They were so busy that none of them noticed that, inside the sterile bag that had been sealed, a mold was growing at an unusual speed in the corner of the bag that had not been cleaned yet. When it expanded to a certain scale, it suddenly ignited in cold flames and evaporated into nothingness. During this process, the people nearby came and went. Most of them were members of the biology team. However, there was also an engineer from the maintenance team who hurried over to check several key points inside and outside the laboratory. The target was thus locked on. A corner of the sterile bag silently penetrated the small hole, and a subtle composition flowed out, covering the body of the engineer, who passed by like a formless mist. The alarm went off. With the sound of the alarm, the maintenance team laboratory on the 13th floor of the main building had entered a state of emergency. The relevant information flowed in like a river. Expand. Expand access. Access reserve resources according to plan. At present, 25% of reserve resources have been injected into the vicinity of the municipal plaza at the request of Vice President He. Do you wish to transfer it? The person in charge said without hesitation. Expand access is optimal. Transfer according to plan. At the same time, expand the environmental monitoring of the target area. Old Gao, wait a moment. Ouyang Chen had been quietly sitting in a corner since afternoon. Aside from his limited contact with the outside world, he had practically never issued any orders to the laboratory. His sudden words immediately attracted the attention of the majority of people. The municipal plaza is also very important. After all, there are millions of lives there. How about this? Reserve resources will still be executed according to the allocated quota. Maintain a reserve. Splitting forces is a big taboo. The person in charge today was Xia City's psychic, a B-rank powerhouse, Gao Meng. He had a deep friendship with Ouyang Chen, so he spoke very casually. Then what about our boss Luo's side? Ouyang Chen didn't immediately respond. Instead, he raised his head to look at the central region of the laboratory. On the central control panel over there was the latest surveillance projection of the battlefield inside the Kuang Communications building. It was omnidirectional, multi-angle, and detailed. However, the engineers present rarely raised their heads to look at it. They all preferred to use the hexaear's relevant functions to investigate the situation. In normal working conditions, the relevant functions were strictly restricted in order to guarantee the privacy of users using the psychic wave network. Only in this sort of emergency wartime situation did these geeks, who stayed in the laboratory all year round, have the opportunity to personally experience the excitement of the danger of war. Right now the battle in the Kuang Communications building was in full swing. Whether it was He Yuan's valiant collision with the motorcycle gang, or the gray rat tide that surged over from all directions, or Luo Nan's group running for their lives, all of this caused the geeks' blood to boil, and their blood to run cold. Ouyang-chen raised his head to see the scene of Luo Nan unleashing the first few waves of the dripping sword. It was as if an incorporeal blade had streaked across. In terms of the excitement of the scene, this was far from being comparable to the great battle between He Yuan and the motorcycle gang in the cargo corridor. But Ouyang-chen paid a great deal of attention to these rats that fell one after another. Of course, he also paid great attention to the cause of their deaths. The dripping sword, right? The dripping sword? It's a machine gun. But it's just that it's a bit faster. It's fine against a rat horde. Actually, it's just a rat horde. Its efficiency is a bit lacking. What? You don't feel good about being crushed by a kid? Am I such a narrow-minded person? Gao Meng rubbed the stubble on his chin. Then he stiffly skipped over this topic. You're right about not using backup resources. Conventional mental storms won't have any effect on this type of clone body. And if you want to directly interfere with the material plane, it's a bit more efficient for you to directly make a move for now. But if you make a move, the consumption won't be small. Fortunately, there's always room for recovery here. And it's better to make a move earlier than later. Even the researchers and engineers who had worked together with Ouyang-chen for many years raised their eyebrows when they heard the conversation between Ouyang-chen and Gao Meng. There were a few fellows who didn't have work to do at the moment. They simply drove their portable chairs over. It was always very, very refreshing when extraordinaries made a move. How could they miss this opportunity? Right at this time, the maintenance engineer who had just returned from the biological laboratory just so happened to enter the door. He heard this news and immediately moved over. Moreover, he unconsciously took a few more steps to cut into the inner circle. The group of people thought that Ouyang-chen was going to make a move to interfere, but the following change in the situation left the maintenance team stupefied. What the hell is this? There's even this kind of operation? Compared to the machine gun style of the dripping sword, Luo Nan's modified method had already exceeded the limits of perception for most people. There was no reflection of water droplets. There was no trajectory of flight. Several dozen or over 100 rats inexplicably fell to the ground and died. The way they died was exactly the same as when the dripping sword killed them. But what about the process? Even though the staff members present used the psychic wave network to observe from up close, they were still confused for a time. As a powerful B-rank psychic, Gao Meng's eyesight surpassed that of the vast majority of people here. But because his eyesight was too good, he, who had the nickname of Heavenly Master, could not help but hiss when he saw this treacherous method. Wu Meinyang is most likely giving him special treatment. It was still Luo Nan's method of using the dripping sword. His train of thought wasn't anything out of the ordinary, but the engraved structural skeleton was skillful and nimble. It was as if he was scribbling with a pen. Plus, the effect of removing the intent and leaving the form behind could only prove that Luo Nan's foundational skills in the dripping sword had already reached the pinnacle of perfection. He could completely look down upon the vast majority of ability users in Xia City, and even the entire world who practiced this type of method. Gao Meng grimaced in pain for a time. When did he start practicing this? I'm not too sure about that. You should be able to find out from headquarters. Don't we have to accept missions to download teaching materials? Gao Meng subconsciously wanted to log into headquarters' website, but Ouyang-chen's gaze swept over him from behind his glasses. He finally remembered what time it was and could only laugh in embarrassment. The group of researchers and engineers were a bit disappointed that they were unable to see Ouyang-chen make a move. However, they were able to see the genius methods of the legendary boss Luo. It was quite beneficial. In particular, there were quite a few people among them who had mastered the dripping sword. Right now, their feelings were even more complicated. Some people felt that their own family's dripping sword already had some attainments. It was hard not to feel a bit embarrassed right now. There were also some people who felt that the power of this technique was too small. There were too many restrictions when it came to making a move. They weren't willing to waste too much effort. But when they saw Luo Nan's demonstration, they gave birth to thoughts of studying it once more. The maintenance team discussed spiritedly for a time. The core topic of discussion was this boss Luo too much of a genius? Or was it because the dripping sword was cultivated to the pinnacle that it had this kind of ability? The reason why the maintenance team was distracted in their discussion was because the situation over at Kuwang Communications building had once again entered a controllable state. Following Luo Nan's wanton slaughter of the rat tide, the distance between their group and the biker gang chasing them had already increased to 40 meters. It was without a doubt that the assault against the rat tide had certainly divided a portion of the biker gang's attention. And under He Yuan's powerful strength, these problems had appeared in a rather astonishing amplification. Right now, the exit of the passageway leading to the hangar was in sight. It was at most 50 meters away. But at this time, Ouyang Chen and Gao Meng in the laboratory, Gao De Si Guosheng, and the others in the cargo passageway all furrowed their brows. Chapter 485. Don't retreat. God repeated this command. Then he explained to Luo Nan and Cat Eyes, who were focused on intercepting the rat tide. We have no way to safely ascend at this distance. Cat Eyes teased. Actually, we should be moving forward, right? It looks like old Gao has quite the offensive ability. God didn't respond. He just reported the current situation. Their group was 50 meters away from helipad number 76. Adding the distance to the aircraft, they were over 70 meters away. This distance, plus the time it would take to ascend, would take 40 seconds. At the same time, He Yuan and the biker gang were 40 meters away from them. Judging from the previous battle, the biker gang would need 40 to 50 seconds to cross this area under He Yuan's interception. And if the biker gang were to truly push into the vast area of the helipad, they would lose the restrictions of the cargo corridor. Controlling the direction and speed of their assault would undoubtedly be an even more arduous task. In the end, this wasn't a race. In actual combat, an advantage of a few seconds was equivalent to no advantage at all. While Luo Nan and Cat Eyes were cleaning up the rat tide, the data link between the Deep Blue Walkers had already calculated many times. They came to a consensus. If they retreated any further, the final result would most likely be a life and death battle on the spacious helipad with the wreckage of the aircraft. Instead of this, it would be better to resolve the problem in the relatively favorable environment of the cargo corridor. Luo Nan's group stopped and turned to face the cargo corridor behind them. They were only 30 meters away from the exit of the corridor. Gao Meng smacked his lips in the Shangding building several dozen kilometers away. His conclusion was roughly the same as the other side. We must counterattack. We must counterattack in this cargo corridor. Ouyang, if you really want to make a move, then do it here. Ouyang Chen looked at the problem from a slightly different angle. The opponent has been pressing the line all this time. He has quite a bit of strength to spare. He has grasped the rhythm very well. He must have calculated this step from the beginning of the pursuit. So what? Gao Meng disapproved. We predicted this earlier. The one behind him is an extraordinary to be able to reach this step by relying on the clone body. His consciousness is there. It would be strange if he couldn't do it. The problem right now is to first bring him back before anything else. It's better to make a move earlier than later. You're the one who said it. Don't tell me you want to test the youngsters again? Ouyang Chen adjusted his glasses and replied with a smile. I can't stop young people from having their own ideas. Look, his efficiency hasn't decreased at all. Indeed, Luo Nan hadn't considered the factors on Ouyang Chen's side. He was in high spirits right now in sweeping the rat tide, especially considering a deeper problem. He replied without thinking. Completely wipe out the rat tide and destroy the pressure transfer network. That fellow won't be able to last much longer than the last one. God still believed that the psychic wave network had actively interfered in the latter half of the rat tide. Rather than asking President Ouyang to eliminate the rat tide, it would be better to directly kill the target. Mr. Luo can submit a request. The train of thought on both sides was on completely different channels, but Luo Nan still listened to the opinions of professionals. He followed the procedures he learned earlier and sent out an application through Channel X. Luo Nan didn't care that the other side didn't respond immediately after he sent out the corresponding message. Cat Eyes had completely stopped what she was doing. Currently, there were no living rats within a radius of 100 meters. She knew about Luo Nan's battle results from the few rounds of sweeping. However, she had no intention of correcting God's mistaken perception. She just said to Luo Nan, "The difficulty has increased." Since the biker gang had already discovered the abnormal decrease in the rat tide, they had already shifted the distribution area of the rat tide to the side and the rear 200 meters away. The distance between them and Luo Nan and the others had already increased to nearly 300 meters. This sort of distribution situation had already exceeded the range of Cat Eye's all-encompassing senses. It was already hard for her to grasp the situation completely. She only knew that Luo Nan was still killing. But even if the distance factor wasn't taken into account, it was hard to avoid intense interference from the central battlefield if one wanted to use the mental to interfere with the material plane to continue killing the target. Luo Nan grunted. "There's a bit of a problem." The pace of battle in the cargo corridor was extremely fast. In the time it took for Luo Nan and the others to stop speaking, the distance between He Yuan and the biker gang had shrunk to within 30 meters. They really couldn't retreat at this time. God and Si Guosheng had already gathered their full attention. As professional security personnel, they didn't know what President Ouyang was planning, but their professionalism still drove them to make the steadiest choice. They still maintained their front and rear positions. God crossed his arms, erecting a high-strength alloy shield to serve as a defensive checkpoint. Si Guosheng carried the portable electromagnetic cannon on his shoulder. He stabilized the cannon's muzzle and aimed it at the flitting and leaping figures. The format of fire of the two surged and linked with each other, their energies interconnected, realizing the effect of 1 + 1 greater than 2. Luo Nan had always been relatively sensitive to the format of fire. His telepathic thoughts cut across, and he knew that the format of fire of the two had actually left an opening for He Yuan. With He Yuan's abilities, even if she couldn't reach the standard of Tianbang setting up the format domain by himself that day, it would be hard to say if she had the support of these two elite burners. If this was the case, then there was still a fight to be had. Luo Nan's gaze turned and cast toward the battlefield within the passageway. But the focus of his gaze did not fall upon the battlefield. It didn't even fall upon any part of the material plane. It was just cast into nothingness. Right now, he still retained his examination and contemplation of the repetitive work and repetitive problems of the dripping sword. The problem of how to use the dripping sword to sweep through the rat tide in a more efficient and more technical manner occupied the majority of his brain's resources. This was a simplification of the problem in a certain sense. In any case, Luo Nan had professional security personnel and President Ouyang supporting him from behind the scenes. Luo Nan wasn't worried about his life. Instead, he entered a long-term testing state at the edge of the battlefield. Luo Nan was already quite adept at the normal application of the dripping sword. He could casually dismantle and apply the entire structural skeleton. He could even rely on his feelings to draw on his own power. Such a situation was faintly similar to the training and fighting methods of the martial arts lineage that Gym Master Xiao had taught him. The routines that Luo Nan normally practiced, and the variations in moves that he researched were all for the sake of making the most correct and effective response in actual combat. He normally trained with the dripping sword. He would choose the best of the several hundred dripping swords every day. He would compare them to the parts that were left to the end. He would ponder deeply, refer to, and make corrections. He would constantly temper and optimize the core structural skeleton, making it more and more reasonable and efficient. Now that he was in an actual combat state, there was no need to delve into the details. He just needed to take out the established results and seek killing efficiency. When this efficiency was raised to the extreme, all of the techniques would be integrated into one. They were like the marks of a pen. It was enough to see just a bit of ink. The problem was that Luo Nan wasn't satisfied. If he was only dealing with one or a few enemies, his methods could be said to be like moving clouds and flowing water, lifting something heavy as if it were light. However, when the enemies expanded to hundreds and thousands, no matter how concise and quick the movements were, they would appear monotonous and clumsy after being repeated countless times. No matter how smooth a single line is, the overall effect is trash when it's mechanically piled up. Luo Nan took out the standard for sketching. He took the entire process from the moment he made his move into his field of vision and evaluated it. From this perspective, the current battlefield environment of the rat tide and the confrontation between the strong was a special canvas. The skeleton structure of the dripping sword, which Luo Nan had tempered over and over again, was the brush. Painting on a canvas with a paintbrush was a special process of interference between the mental and the material. After this idea became clear, Luo Nan suddenly discovered that it was of the same origin as his train of thought when he constructed the living starry sky. They were both results of redefining and observing the world from a holistic perspective. They were solidified in a way that conformed to his habits of thinking. This was the process of Luo Nan's self-cognition. As his train of thought grew clearer and more intuitive, the corresponding feeling grew more and more intense. As a painter, it was obviously possible to casually draw on the canvas. However, the lack of beauty, the abandonment of rules and logic gave Luo Nan a rather terrible experience. Was there no efficient, orderly, rigorous, and even a bit of beauty in the overall form of interference? Oh, there was. Wasn't President Ouyang's logic world just like this? Why did his train of thought seem to have returned to the concept of an order frame? If this was the case, then his train of thought just now was simply a form of creating a brand new order frame. Of course, this kind of creation depended on time and local conditions. It was a kind of temporary method with many restrictions. Luo Nan circled around a few times, and all sorts of thoughts that he had accumulated over this period of time began to surge. He faintly felt that he already had a few similar results. However, he had grown far too quickly in these past 2 months, and his gains were far too great. Some of his gains were inadvertently drowned out. When it came down to it, he needed to carefully sort them out. Luo Nan was a bit distressed. What is it again? Cat Eyes didn't understand. There's something in my brain. His words suddenly came to a halt halfway through. It wasn't that his train of thought had been cut off. It was that the outside world suddenly stimulated him like a sudden clap of thunder and lightning. A long ripping sound rang out at this moment, followed by the sound of an explosion. He Yuan's deep blue walker armor heavily smashed through the side wall, sending rubble flying everywhere. However, she immediately spun around, forcefully changing her direction to block the front of Luo Nan and the others. She relied on this displacement to coil and soar the format of fire around her body. It connected with the flickering flames of Gouda and Si Guosheng. A blazing radiance burst forth in an instant, illuminating the originally bewildering passageway with snow-white light. Format domain. In front of her, the motorcycle biker's body seemed to have ignited with fire. The surrounding warped air was wantonly transmitting high temperatures, dyeing the nearby partitions and walls with a layer of charcoal-like black. This ability user, Clone Lung, had eyes that seemed hollow yet deep. He locked onto He Yuan, who had set up her format domain. His body slightly arched, looking as if he was about to unleash an explosive attack. But this fellow's movements paused in the next second. He turned his head in a very strange manner, seeming to have been disturbed by some sudden event behind him. It was also at this moment that Luo Nan saw the strange split of the other's mouth. Syllables flowed from his throat for the first time at the same time. It looks like I need to add something first. While most people were baffled, He Yuan issued an order within the mission channel. Chapter 486. Si Guosheng was the only one in the team with an electromagnetic gun. He fired it reflexively. Amidst the sound of electric currents, A 15-gram metal pellet exploded out of the muzzle at 20 times the speed of sound. It tore through the sound barrier. The air burned within the narrow passageway, and hot winds assaulted their faces. Si Guosheng was already paying more attention to his nearby companions, but Luo Nan and Cat Eyes still had their ears rumble. They instinctively crouched down. The raging flames and heat waves surged above their heads. This kind of bombardment was not something the fleshly body could resist. However, the biker gang member displayed his super keen senses. Even though He Yuan had specially used the mission channel of the psychic wave network to secretly issue orders, this fellow still shifted his position ahead of time before the artillery shell left the chamber. He narrowly avoided the trajectory of the bullet. The deafening sound of an explosion rang out at nearly the same time. Under the effect of the powerful kinetic energy, the passageway behind them collapsed in an instant. Even the structure of the upper and lower floors caved in. The entire building groaned and trembled. He Yuan's figure turned from stillness at this moment. An arc of light flashed and she pounced forward. Admittedly, the biker gang member had avoided the disaster of death by shifting his position ahead of time, but this limited his direction. In addition to the obstruction of the collapsing ruins behind him, he had practically no leeway to choose. And what he had to face right now, aside from He Yuan's assault of an arc of light that transcended the sound barrier, there was also the rapidly expanding formatting domain. Intense light and heat waves intersected in the void. Visually, the space seemed to warp and deform. The light enveloped the surroundings in the next second, sweeping away practically every shadowy corner. It made one suspect that even their internal organs had been penetrated, turning transparent. Light and heat were always linked together, but at this moment, the heat within the passageway was greatly reduced under the all-encompassing intense light. The high temperature of the furnace, controlled by the biker gang member, was cleansed and dissipated. His body also warped and shrunk within the light. In the end, he was streaked by the swift and fierce arc of light. He smashed through the wall amidst a spray of blood, and quickly fled far away. He Yuan had already strode forward in pursuit, but after taking 2 steps, her speed suddenly decreased. The mission channel displayed the latest news. Machine number 1's overclocking state has ended. Officer. God could not help but shout. He Yuan took another step forward, but she still stopped. And at this time, the aura of the biker gang member, which was boiling like a furnace, rapidly cooled down and calmed down. After charging out 200 meters, he simply concealed himself without a trace. This was not just on the spiritual plane. Even when he interfered with the physical plane, there was no feedback at all. It was as if the spiritual plane had disappeared into thin air. Luo Nan was speechless when faced with this kind of opponent who hid when he said he would. Formatting the domain. Cat Eye's attention was drawn to He Yuan. Her first impression of He Yuan wasn't good, but after a period of observation and familiarization, as well as the shifting of hatred and other factors, her evaluation of He Yuan became more and more fair. This wave of maneuvering is really immediate. It feels like she's not much worse than that Tian Bang. That slash was also very cool. He Yuan took a few seconds to regulate her breathing, but she was still panting a little. It was obvious that she had consumed a lot of energy just now. The enemy retreated on their own. It's probably because they cut through the supply line that they lost the ability to continue fighting. Supplies? What was going on? Is the rat tide almost cleaned up? Currently, the distance between the group and the main body of the rat tide had already exceeded the range of Cat Eye's all-encompassing senses. In comparison, the integrated sensing module of the Deep Blue Walkers was more useful. Combined with the shared images from the psychic wave network, she was able to roughly project the current state of the rat tide in the ruins behind them. It could be seen that the thermal imaging results were sporadic in the surroundings of the freight corridor, where the temperature had already dropped. The data statistics were much more convenient. God reported. There are 1437 left, 1311 left. The rate of decline is fast. According to this rate of reduction, the rat tide would be swept clean in another 10 seconds or so. Even if it was raining knives, it would be impossible to kill them off so quickly, right? Cat Eyes looked at Luo Nan in astonishment. Even she was doubting whether or not the Shangding building had joined in the interference. Luo Nen actually frowned. In the instant He Yuan and the motorcycle gang collided, the enemy had exploded at least 500 rats in order to support the corresponding explosion. This caused the rat tide to shrink by over a quarter in an instant. But what was truly strange was that there were no decent reinforcements after that. This was the most important reason why the scale of the rat tide had shrunk. The source seemed to have been cut off. Luo Nen expanded his sensing range to cover the entire area. At this time, He Yuan explained softly, "We just sent a group of people to destroy the enemy's nest within the building. It can be considered as taking drastic measures." Cat Eyes was enlightened. "A nest? That's right. Of course there's one. But do you know where it is? Since it's a nest, energy and nutrition are indispensable. In the wilderness, these nests are often placed within high-energy mineral deposits that can be absorbed and transformed. The basic conditions won't change in the city. It must be within an area suitable for replenishment." Cat Eyes snapped her fingers. The energy center. Due to the leaps and bounds in energy technology, the current mega metropolis of Xia City had basically achieved a decentralized distribution of energy supply. For example, the gear laboratory that Luo Nan was more familiar with was equipped with an independent power station. Large buildings like the Kawang Communications building located in the center of the bustling city were also equipped with an independent energy center. If one didn't care about the technical links such as mass-to-energy conversion, then the most convenient energy supply point would naturally be there. The relevant images were already connected to the mission channel as they spoke. The energy center should be a team of ability users mobilized by He Yuan. There seemed to be a military police background as well. Right now, the operation to clear out the nest had already ended. They were currently cleaning up the mess. He Yuan explained a step further. Right now, the SCA has already taken samples of the abnormal changes in the building's energy center. The relevant areas within the city are under full surveillance. If this sort of situation is encountered again, an emergency power cut will be needed. Cat Eyes gave her evaluation. Crushed by resources. He Yuan had fully utilized their advantage in resources in Xia City. Soldiers came with generals, water came with earthware. Even if they fell into a disadvantage for a time, they could immediately carry out targeted improvements to make up for the loopholes. As the enemy's strength was gradually exposed, the enemy's space for activity would constantly shrink. The advantage of their side would grow greater and greater. This was truly the most upright way of using troops. This sort of method wasn't anything out of the ordinary. What was truly rare was that He Yuan was in the middle of an intense battle. She was able to think and issue orders in a timely manner. Otherwise, even if they had more resources, it would be meaningless if they couldn't mobilize them properly. At this time, Cat Eyes could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Without the rat tied to die for him, that fellow would probably only be at the standard of 4 or 5 explosive strikes. Speaking of which, he's also injured. I didn't get a clear look just now. Are his injuries serious enough? His chest was cut open. His internal organs are damaged. He Yuan's breathing had completely returned to normal at this time. Her breathing was practically non-existent. She wore an exoskeleton armor, and her face was covered by a helmet. She looked like an ice-cold robot. In reality, her thoughts were as calm as a machine's. The enemy's retreat isn't necessarily a good thing. From the design of the ability user clone body, it can be seen that they weren't built for a protracted battle from the very beginning. Moreover, they were able to perfectly conceal themselves even after being injured. This only proves that their injuries didn't truly affect their strength. God expressed his approval. That's right. Clone bombs and ability user assassins are the true job of these fellows. Cat Eyes rubbed her chin. After all, they aren't true life forms. If they were to throw caution to the wind and self-destruct, I don't know what the scene would be like. Oh, if that's the case, could it be that they relied on the rat tide to greatly exhaust your physical strength in preparation for the final strike? Are you still okay? He Yuan didn't directly respond to Cat Eyes' inquiry. She only added, they were also measuring my limits. It would be more advantageous for me to make a final judgment. At the same time, they might be luring me to get used to the intensity from before, causing me to make an error in judgment at the last moment. Wait for the thunderous strike. Cat Eye's gaze swept over her companions and the surrounding ruined environment. Even if you think with your toes, you'll know that the moment when the flying device takes off is the most perfect. With that fellow's ability and destructive power, it's simply an unbreakable knot. Why didn't they wait until then to reveal their trump card? Si Guosheng spoke in a deep voice. This was the first time he had taken the initiative to participate in a discussion since joining the team. His thoughts were extremely clear. The target clearly possesses extremely powerful concealment techniques. The building's surveillance and sensor systems haven't discovered any traces of him up until now. It's because the rat tide is hard to conceal. A certain someone is extremely sensitive. Cat Eye's gaze turned and pointed straight at Luo Nan. Luo Nan didn't react at all. Cat Eyes had long since grown accustomed to his wandering soul. She just shrugged. In the end, a counterattack is the most correct choice. In the inner world, strength ultimately speaks for itself. The problem is, where is he? We haven't discovered any traces yet, but the rat tide is about to arrive. Oh, they've all been killed. Don't just look at the group of people conversing at the end of the passageway. Most of their attention was focused on observing the surveillance. They were trying to search for the hidden and dangerous target. But so far they had found nothing. Everyone's gazes inevitably turned to Luo Nan. Little did they know that Luo Nan's heart was quite vexed right now. The scale of the rat tide rapidly cleared to zero, representing the complete collapse of the so-called pressure transfer network. But from his perspective, the nature of his paper rapidly changed. The feelings he had just accumulated also vanished like smoke into thin air. Even if he had some clues right now, he could forget about experimenting with them. Fortunately, he was able to notice the gazes of his companions. He withdrew his mind somewhat unwillingly and asked suspiciously, "What did you guys say?" Everyone was already immune to this sort of reaction. He Yuan immediately repeated the relevant problem in a simple and clear manner. Her main focus was still on the whereabouts of the motorcycle gang. Luo Nan shook his head. That fellow certainly has some method to interfere with mental senses. I fell for it before. If I do it again, I don't dare to say that my senses will be correct. For example, right now, it's impossible for that fellow to just flee a kilometer or two away. But the truth is that I can't find any traces of him at all. He believed that the motorcycle gang should have a method of assimilating with the surrounding environment. This included the optical aspect and the deeper information aspect. In this case, he would inevitably be troubled by the corresponding camouflage colors, unless he completely gathered and analyzed the information on the material plane within a radius of several kilometers. Luo Nan finished his analysis and looked at He Yuan. But He Yuan still had her metal visor facing him. Actually, it wasn't just He Yuan. Gao Da and Si Guosheng had the same posture. Their gazes pierced through the visor to stare at him. Luo Nan just felt baffled. He turned to look at Cat Eyes, who looked quite normal. What did I miss? Cat Eyes blinked. She made an exaggerated expression of astonishment in an instant. 1 kilometer. Why 1 kilometer? Vice President He, what was the range of his all-encompassing senses when someone reported last time? How would I know how much he said last time? Luo Nan saw this and immediately knew that he had inadvertently let the cat out of the bag. The speed at which his mental senses expanded and the frequency of changes had already drowned out his memory reserves. Luo Nan's mind went blank for a moment. He could only answer vaguely. My senses toward living beings are more sensitive right now. My all-encompassing senses are a bit higher than normal. Cat Eyes laughed. Your family senses are 10 times or 20 times. Luo Nan glared fiercely at her. It doesn't matter if it's 10 times or 20 times. It doesn't matter if you can't find the enemy. Is there a need to keep harping on this? You'll be happy when I tell you the number of 20 kilometers later, right? Ha! An inexplicable inspiration popped up in the depths of Luo Nan's mind in this instant. Luo Nan's current level of mental senses really wasn't his highest level. His highest level was still when his soul left his body, when he completely broke free from the shackles of his fleshly body. In the past, there was a huge disparity between the fusion of body and soul and the separation of body and soul. This was mainly due to the serious imbalance between his mind and his body. Right now, Luo Nan was following Gym Master Xiao in tempering his fleshly body. He also received the reverse nourishment of his soul strength. His toughness had increased by a large margin. In addition, he was influenced by the gear telescope format. The form of mental senses underwent a substantial transformation, and its efficiency grew day by day. The disparity between the two states grew smaller and smaller. But in reality, the disparity between the limits of his soul strength and his fleshly body was growing larger. The reason why it didn't lead to more serious consequences was because Luo Nan made full use of the miraculous effects of the neuron in the outside world. It was also because his attainments in the mutual interference between the mental and the material had increased by a large margin. In short, if he were to leave his body right now, he would indeed have the ability to raise the level of his mental senses to another level. At that time, Luo Nan's face drooped, and the light that flickered in his mind grew brighter and brighter. That's right. At that time, he would use a special method to realize the mutual interference between the mental and material planes. The soul cloak. Yes. He had just thought of the paintbrush and canvas, but he wasn't able to understand the method of interference clearly. It was the soul cloak. Luo Nan still remembered that he had just comprehended the mysteries of the condensation ring that day. He had used it as a medium to forcefully interfere with the material world, allowing him to bring the external neuron to gear and open the mysterious door leading to the cloud world. It was during this process that the soul cloak was molded and formed with the help of the condensation ring, allowing his soul strength to truly cross the boundary between the mental and material planes. He realized a breakthrough from 0 to 1, achieving an unprecedented interference effect. His sense of familiarity came from this. The cloak. Could the interference effect of the dripping sword be like this? No. It was the same method. The difference between having and not having a clear direction was enormous. And Luo Nan was used to the condensation ring, which had no killing power at all. If you were to add the support structures one by one, what sort of effect would there be? He really wanted to test it out right now. Luo Nan nearly left his body right away. Luckily, he still remembered what time it was right now. Once his soul left his body, his fleshly body would be tantamount to an empty shell. He might not be able to react in time if he encountered an unexpected event. He was still able to distinguish between priorities and urgency. But if this was the case, so what if he didn't leave his body? In any case, it was a method of mutual interference between the mental and the material. It didn't seem to matter if he left his body or not. At most, he could make the external neuron in his brain change its form. It would change from a fluid form that was as bright as a dragon to a fixed form like the condensation ring. Would there be any danger? Luo Nan didn't think too much about it. In fact, the external neuron in his brain had already coiled and twisted the moment his philosophy changed, forming a perfect condensation ring structure. Then, a cool and comfortable feeling spread out from his brain. It was as if a layer of mint had been smeared near his brain. It was cold, cool, and extremely comfortable. Was this the condensation ring letting water seep out? Luo Nan's body suddenly froze when this thought was confirmed. Then cold sweat flowed down. He had actually condensed the condensation ring in his brain, and he had even allowed it to freely absorb water molecules. This was a standard case of pouring water into his brain. It must be known that water made up 70% of a human's body weight. With the powerful might of the condensation ring, it only took a breath to separate and purify bodily fluids and condense them into a bead of water. If he had placed several support structures into the ring, his brain might have exploded by now. This was a high-end way of dying that not even the cloned rats had enjoyed. Presumably, it would be passed down in Xia City and even the entire inner world, becoming a joke for 100 years. Luo Nan's body was covered in cold sweat, and he wanted to immediately disperse the structure. However, the cool and comfortable feeling continued. The condensation ring formed by the external neuron did not form a substantial bead of water to fill his brain. Only the cool feeling continued to spread. It seeped from his brain to his face, to his neck, to his chest, back, waist, and finally to his legs and even the tips of his fingers. Even his hair was seeping with cool air. This cool feeling was like an endlessly expanding membrane that covered every corner of his body. It continued to expand outward, brushing past the surrounding void as if it were weightless. At this very moment, the 3 deep blue walkers, who were equipped with advanced sensing equipment, did not discover any abnormalities. Only Cat Eyes looked at him with some confusion, but she did not obtain any concrete results. What followed was a feeling that grew more and more familiar. It was exactly the same as the soul cloak that unfurled after his soul left his body. This marvelous cloak that hovered between the tangible and the intangible simultaneously unfurled toward the mental and material worlds. On the mental plane, it drifted in the polar domain. On the material plane, it affected the microscopic. From beginning to end, it maintained a certain distance from the world that ordinary people were used to, yet it could cut in at any time. Luo Nan's grasp on the mental plane was quite good. After all, this was a mysterious and undetermined region. What he saw was what he got. What he knew was everything. But on the microscopic plane, 1,000 years of physics development had already drawn the basic picture of the microscopic world. With the existing knowledge system, Luo Nan was certain that his submicron level sensing precision was far from being able to touch the true microscopic world. However, the marvelous effects of the condensation ring manifested here. He really could not see it, but he could clearly feel the marvelous disturbances within the area covered by his mental senses. The atmosphere, the building, and the human body were like the gentle flapping of a cloak. And when Luo Nan's thoughts took effect, the boundless power that came from the mental side instantly suppressed the relevant disturbances. The cloak expanded and rippled according to his thoughts. It was as if it ruled the entire microscopic plane. With Luo Nan's current knowledge structure, wanting to give this phenomenon an accurate and comprehensive explanation was tantamount to a lunatic's ravings. He did not count on this. He just needed to use his own clairvoyance to decipher it. This was an interference painting that used the condensation ring as the tip of the brush, and the surrounding material plane as the canvas. The cloak was the result of the painting. But this result was a product of the unconscious. It could change at any time as Luo Nan's consciousness entered it. All he needed to know was what direction the change was. And so he needed to have a clear train of thought. But new information formed within the natural disturbances of the cloak before Luo Nan could sort things out. It was transmitted back. The high-speed moving target caused the natural disturbances on the microscopic plane to deform. Large amounts of ingenious hedging operations were carried out, causing the traces to be mostly cancelled out before they could be transmitted to the normal perceptible plane. The traces were ingeniously buried within the multifarious and complex flow of information. The technique was marvelous, but these operations appeared excessively noisy if one were to use the microscopic background as a reference. They were too orderly and deliberate. The motorcycle gang. The concrete facts had just been restored to Luo Nan's mind when another stimulus followed. Compared to the exquisite and peerless concealment and control of the cloak, this wave was simply an explosive attack. Luo Nan did not need to decode too much to figure out the direction and the concrete changes. It was the explosive growth history of a cell. Under the effect of some inconceivable method, a single cell rapidly absorbed an enormous amount of energy on the submicron scale. It borrowed this energy to carry out a frenzied fission and proliferation. Then it completed the transformation from a single cell to a complete life form. Then it divided and proliferated, a complete set of processes. As for the appearance of the proliferated life form, Luo Nan had already encountered it countless times before. The gray and white rat shadows were like flowing turbid liquid. They sprinkled down one after another, converging into a river and surging out like a tide. Luo Nan was just about to issue an alarm when the information from the energy center entered the mission channel. The relevant monitoring personnel discovered this situation at practically the same time as Luo Nan through the changes in the power supply curve. The energy system controlled by the supercomputer reacted faster than humans by a thread. The energy supply was cut off the moment the problem appeared. However, the enemy only needed a split second to do so. It was a mechanism that had been planted in place long ago. Plus, those were probably not real rats. Luonan noticed that this wave of gray and white rat tide did not realize a complete conversion of mass and energy. The things that surged out from the energy center were more like phantoms of the rat tide than the rat tide. They existed between reality and illusion. Perhaps this was closer to the essence of the enemy's design. The rats were not just rats. They were special networks that were used to shift enormous pressure and increase the operating space. The network was just a network. The true killer move still lay in the concealed fellow who had yet to emerge. Luonan could not afford to delay no matter what. He could not afford to delve any deeper into his research. He followed closely the warning information raised by the energy center. Through the functions of the psychic wave network, he directly made changes to the intelligence map integrated into the mission channel. But the problem was that he was actually unable to make changes. According to the feedback from the psychic wave network system, there was an even higher level of authority to synchronize the operation, and the overlap rate reached 100%. Chapter 487. Due to the interference of a strong magnetic field, the transmission rate of the psychic wave network in the target area has dropped by 4 points. 3 fulcrum points have been temporarily disconnected. They are in the direction of the energy center. Guild leader, we expect the interference rate to drop below 20%. The SCA requests that the power center temporarily disconnect from the network. 4 of the rescue team's fulcrums have been disconnected. There are only 9 fulcrums left in the target area, which is close to the bottom line. The atmosphere in the maintenance team on the 13th floor of the Shangding building instantly became tense. The maintenance team had always been monitoring the battle situation in the communication building, and had always maintained the ability to intervene at any time. However, when a new wave of rats emerged from the energy center, the monitoring remained the same, but the expected ability to intervene quickly dropped. This kind of negative trend made the staff members involuntarily suck in a breath of cold air. The fulcrum of the psychic wave network was the ability user who used the hexaear terminal. The existence of these people was the foundation of the psychic wave network. Currently, within the communications building of Division King, aside from Luonan's group of 5, there were 4 support personnel on the helipad. There was also a 3-man combat squad that was temporarily mobilized in the energy center. There was also a 4-man rescue squad that was heading to the passageway to rescue the injured. After the new wave of rats appeared, the combat team in the energy center and the medical team in the middle of the freight corridor were not attacked, but their hexaear terminals were disconnected from the psychic wave network. This is anti-interference. I feel like I'm being targeted. Gao Ming's expression was solemn as he stared at the central projector without blinking. On the other hand, Ouyang Chen had just finished the last stroke on the shared intelligence map. It could be seen that the marks were distributed in a circular pattern, shrinking layer by layer, from the original 200 meters to the current 100 meters area. Gao Ming's expression turned even uglier when he saw the trajectory map. Luonan and Cat Eyes have covered this area with their all-encompassing senses, but they still haven't discovered anything. Ouyang, this is no longer a situation they can handle. Gao Meng, the other staff members, and even Luonan's group at Ku Wang's communications building were able to grasp the whereabouts of the biker gang by relying on the trajectory Ouyang Chen had drawn. At that moment, the grayish-white rat horde relied on their almost illusory form to advance in a straight line. They approached from the energy center all the way to the periphery of the cargo corridor. Meanwhile, the biker assassins began to change their existing circular route and approached from the right and bottom of the flanks. The biker gang should also know that their whereabouts have been exposed, but so what? He Yuan, God, and Si Guosheng turned to face the enemy and activated their long-range weapons. Among them, the most powerful one was the portable electromagnetic cannon. If fired at full power, even a B+ class expert would find it hard to defend against it head-on. But the problem was that the biker gang was positioned on the lower side of the building. The middle floor and walls were filled with obstacles, making it completely unsuitable for the electromagnetic cannon to unleash its power. As for the maintenance team, With Gao Meng's insight and the results of the psychic wave network's detection, he could roughly tell that the enemy's electric rat army explosion technique did not increase the number of rats, but rather the upper limit of the biker assassin. The rat tide, which was in between reality and illusion, was like a gigantic solar panel that absorbed energy from the void without end. Then it transformed the energy into energy through miraculous means. The increase in its lethality was not obvious yet, but its effect on the psychic wave network was immediate. Gao Meng couldn't help but feel a little annoyed. Interfering with the surrounding environment and forming a domain. That's F*King crazy. With this kind of operation, an extraordinary assassin can jump out at any time. People like us might as well just go lie dead. Under such a pressing situation, Ouyang Chen's reply was somewhat off-topic. I actually thought of Mo Luan. The assassin's body weight has dropped by 14 kilograms in 10 seconds, and the rate of decline is still increasing. Currently, his body fluid content is less than 40%, and his blood is almost completely empty. There are already problems with the normal operation of his body, but he's using an irreversible energy transformation method to avoid it and increase his efficiency. What comes next is definitely an explosive attack, and only one attack. Oh, Mo Luan's black soul body. Yes, if we had this kind of technology, perhaps Mo Luan would still be able to continue living, although it would be more difficult. Gao Meng rolled his eyes. Come on, if word of this gets out, you'll be the chief supporter of the clone technology. Is now the time to say such things? Ouyang Chen laughed. Times change, generations change. Our old friend is gone. We were born as humans, so we have to feel a little nostalgic. Everyone, return to your positions and follow the usual practice. Although there is interference, we also have the relevant contingency plan. The standard cannot be lowered, and we strive to raise the interference rate to above 25%. Although the situation was getting more and more urgent, Ouyang Chen's calmness still gave the maintenance team absolute confidence. The people who had gathered earlier dispersed and returned to their respective positions. An experimental assistant suddenly felt that his side was a little crowded. He turned his head and saw a familiar face. Hey, Charlie, you. Before his thoughts were completely clear, the central hub of the psychic wave network had already entered a full standby state. The relevant load was greatly increased, and the interference model was extracted from the relevant contingency plan and handed over to Ouyang Chen for final confirmation. Ouyang Chen stood in front of the central projector and pondered for a moment. He manually modified a few parameters, and after verifying it with the supercomputer, he began to load it. The entire process took about 3 seconds. At this time, the biker gang had already entered the 70-meter zone. What do you want to do? At this time, Gao De saw Ouyang Chen's plan and raised his eyebrows. Logic world? This is still the safest. That's true. Gao Meng's expression became much better. The logic world mode was a new transformation of the psychic wave network. It represented the pinnacle of Ouyang Chen's extraordinary realm. It was also the culmination of the spatial fault and the extraordinary domain. It was truly the difference between heaven and earth. Back at Frost River reality, Ouyang Chen had used the logic world to encircle all the elites of the Order of Justice in Xia City. He had also successfully resisted the attack of the outworld demons summoned by An Wang. In the end, he had even become the battlefield between Her Majesty Empress Wu and the Order of Justice's first ablatum. As long as the logic world was successfully set up, even if the opponent was a true extraordinary, the extraordinary would not be able to harm even a hair on Luo Nan and the others before they could break through the unfathomable space. Needless to say, this kind of crippled critical strike assassin was the final result. Their flesh and bones would turn to ash within the logic world, returning to nothingness. At this time, the person in charge of the scheduling team asked, "Should we proceed with resource protection?" The so-called resource protection referred to the temporary interruption of all services and functions of the psychic wave network. All resources would be tilted to ensure the completion of the logic world structure. Ouyang Chen shook his head. We can't withdraw from the plaza, and the city isn't stable. Don't restrict us. I'll just put in a bit more effort on my side. Gao Meng was a little surprised. This is very strenuous. Ouyang slowly sat down and stared at the colorful projection. He said softly, "The opponent only has the power to attack once. Whether he succeeds or not, he will die. Time is short, so the most important thing is to grasp the timing. It doesn't matter if it consumes energy or not." You're right. However, as long as the corresponding domain interference was in place, it was possible to destroy the rat tide network in advance. Perhaps we don't even have to completely set it up. I hope so. After saying that, Ouyang closed his eyes and entered a wonderful and pure state. Gao Ming consciously took a step forward. While looking at Gu Ouyang, he was also paying attention to the movements of Ku Wang's communications building and was giving out on-the-spot commands. "President, your psychic power has intervened. The interference rate on the scene has increased to 17%, 18%, 20%. The interference equipment on Boss is at full power. Very good. Temporarily allocate resources to maintain the network's stability. Report the logic world's model conversion ratio. 66%. Gao Ming nodded. This conversion ratio meant that Ouyang progress in setting up the logic world was already 2/3 complete. The basic framework should have been set up. Just as he thought about it, another report came in. The enemy is 50 meters away. Before he finished speaking, the projector displayed the scene on the scene. A long chi sound rang out in the air inside the building. Following that, dense smoke and mist appeared out of thin air and spread out. This layer of smoke and mist appeared without reason. It was as if it came from every corner of the air. The temperature and density were extremely high. In an instant, it covered the upper half of the freight corridor, including the relevant floors. In the space of a breath, the human figure on the monitor screen became a little blurry. The thermal imaging system had almost completely stopped working. At this time, the staff's voice became hurried. The network interference rate has dropped by 7 points, 18%, 17%. The other side followed closely. The conversion ratio has dropped to 47% and is still dropping. Gao Ming instantly became excited. Fortunately, his many years of experience had allowed him to calm down. He immediately looked at Ouyang and then looked at the relevant indicators. Only then did he say in a calm tone, "President, your psychic power output is stable. Continue to report the enemy's situation. They have temporarily stopped moving. Their weight is still dropping, but the rate of energy conversion has decreased. What about the rat tide? They are moving to the same side of the enemy. Their numbers have decreased. The specific details are still being calculated." Gao Ming truly relaxed. This is a stalemate caused by the interference of the supernatural domain. President Ouyang is already fighting the enemy. Temporary losses are nothing. Keep observing and report in time. After saying this, Gao Ming's gaze stopped on Ouyang face again. He felt a little strange. Why did it form a stalemate? Was it because the enemy had invested too many resources on the assassins that it was difficult to digest in one go? Or was it to further lock onto the real target? It couldn't be that his research addiction was acting up, and he was trying to figure out the essence of the enemy, right? Just as he was thinking, he received a new situation. The secretary has used the plan reading authority. Forget it, let her be. She has full control of the scene anyway. Gao Ming was a little impressed. At this distance, the motorcycle gang would not even need a second to launch an assassination. He Yuan was still distracted by the plan at this time. Should he say that she had great willpower? But then again, no matter how strong the secretary was, she could not compare to the boss. Everyone else had already turned to face the enemy. Boss Luo was still in his original position. He did not know when his mind had wandered off. Didn't this group of fellows have a normal orientation? Luo Nan, who had a very normal orientation, was certainly unable to attend to other aspects right now. Moreover, his understanding of others was a bit lacking. He was using the interference of the soul cloak to fully perceive the changes in his surroundings. He could not attend to anything else. At this very moment, Luo Nan could truly feel the pressure transfer network constructed by the illusion of the rat tide. It had already established a close connection with the motorcycle gang. This did not mean that the physical distance between the two was rapidly shrinking. It could also mean that some sort of energy operation and transformation link had been established. From Luo Nan's perspective, the true function of the pressure transfer network was to draw in an extremely complex structure that came from the direction of the polar domain. It interfered with the extreme energy operation and transformation method of the motorcycle gang itself. In the blink of an eye, a terrifying scene of destruction was formed. The fundamental purpose of this scene was to rapidly transform the existence within the range of interference into an extremely destructive power. It also gave the existence a clear direction. Luo Nan was blocking the front. Luo Nan's heart was not fearful even though he clearly understood this. In fact, all his other emotions were washed away by an intense thought before they could display their effects. This was it. In that instant, Luo Nan clearly saw a special format that interfered with a special environment. It formed a model of a special scene. The last such model was President Ouyang's logic world. Just as he was thinking, something similar to the order and rules of the logic world really were playing around him. Was it an illusion? In any case, this really was a good reference. Luo Nan's impression became clearer. He remembered that President Ouyang's logic world was able to warp the mental and material planes. It formed a space-time fault that sat between reality and illusion. Its experimental nature was a bit stronger. It didn't have a clear inclination towards hostile combat. However, its structure was complex and rigorous. It was incomparably flexible. In comparison, the motorcycle gang and the rat tide jointly constructed a scene of destruction. It was completely born for slaughter. It used a high-level method similar to the conversion of mass and energy to realize the highly efficient transformation of energy forms. The microscopic plane was the raw material pool. The mental and material interference constructed the transformation reactor and the transmission bridge. Luo Nan observed this violent and grand structure with clairvoyance. After coming to a corresponding conclusion, he finally integrated his own reality into it. This toy was admittedly an excellent reference, but he would most likely not be able to find an opportunity to refer to it in the future if he allowed it to continue developing. Right now, the soul cloak was still fluttering in the void, but it was clearly affected by the scene of destruction, especially when it brushed past the microscopic plane. It felt as if it was being scorched by a blazing flame. The corresponding order became scattered and scattered. It was nearly impossible to form. It even showed signs of withering for the first time. Luo Nan was able to confirm one thing from this. They interfered with each other. Due to the direct connection between the soul cloak and the condensation ring, the water molecules were quite active wherever it went. The energy transformation process driven by the scene of destruction was mainly heat energy. It was inevitable that a certain amount of loss would occur in these places where water vapor was rich. All of this was clearly engraved in Luo Nan's mind. Interfere with it. Destroy it. Maybe add a few auxiliary structures. Forget about it. The more Luo Nan became familiar with the soul cloak, the clearer he understood that the condensation ring was on one level among the main and 5 auxiliary structures that made up the dripping sword. The other 5 auxiliary structures were on another level, and the gap between the 2 levels was enormous. The condensation ring was the true core of the microscopic world. It touched upon the level of molecules and atoms. The other 5 auxiliary structures at most guided and utilized the beads of water condensed by the condensation ring. It was no wonder that President Ouyang had only skimmed over the 5 auxiliary structures in his evaluation of the dripping sword during the intermediate training class of the Xia City branch. Only the condensation ring was heavily colored and full of praise. Because of this, the other 5 auxiliary structures were far from being qualified to be used on the level of the soul cloak. Right now, Luo Nan could either develop an application method based on the characteristics of the condensation ring, or he could use other methods to interfere. Luo Nan chose the latter without any hesitation. Before he could understand the fundamental nature of the condensation ring's affinity with water molecules, any application development would be the ravings of a lunatic. As for other methods of interference, they could be used on this level. At the very least, they had to be able to touch upon the polar domain and the microscopic world. There was only one method that Luonan could think of in a short amount of time to possess these prerequisites. Crash! The familiar vibration of the heavily chained crow spread out in Luonan's mind. Luonan's lips opened and closed slightly. He silently recited the mantra of "My heart's a prison." With the condensation ring transformed from the peripheral neuron of his brain as the core, 6 illusory rays of light appeared at the same time. 3 rays of light crisscrossed to form 4 ends. They joined together to form a proper tetrahedron in the void. They then formed an external and inscribed sphere, constructing the visualization diagram of formatting theory. The crashing vibrations grew clearer and clearer, but the heavily chained crow never appeared. Instead, the visualization diagram suddenly flared outward with Luonan at its center, expanding in all directions. According to the principles that Luonan had just comprehended, the heavily chained crow should be the interference diagram formed by Luonan's self-format acting on himself and the surrounding external environment. In this sense, the nature of the heavily chained crow and the soul cloak were the same. It was just that the heavily chained crow occupied a more fundamental position. After all, Luonan's foundation was built upon the foundation of the format wheel. Luonan used coupling theory to improve it. He used his vast and boundless soul strength as the God gear, and he used his own body cultivation as the body gear. They interfered and coupled with each other to form an order frame. This was Luonan's major format, his fundamental format. The condensation ring was more like an advanced plugin that was made to deal with the special circumstances of soul strength. It allowed Luonan's inexhaustible soul strength to truly interfere with the material plane outside of Luonan's body. At this stage, Luonan had no intention of investigating the difference in status between the two, but he knew that he needed to tightly combine the two interference diagrams. He needed to use his most fundamental strength in reality, through the most unobstructed channel. His thoughts were clear, and the two interference diagrams suddenly fused together, fully combining together. As the visualization diagram expanded outwards, Luonan vaguely felt that the nimble cloak that fluttered and danced in the air seemed to be branded with a layer of faint patterns. The patterns were like chains that twisted and extended. The feeling of nimbleness and emptiness gradually faded away, and what replaced it was an unprecedented sluggishness. It was as if the entire world was born upon the fluttering cloak. Soon, the cloak stopped fluttering, but the expanding momentum of the scene of destruction had unwittingly recovered. It stretched out in all directions with an even more astonishing extent. The cloak was transforming. Under the interaction of the two interference images, it was as if a large tent had been set up. There was clearly a marvelous difference between the inside and outside of the tent. It was a difference in order. The true meaning of Luonan's order frame was expressed beneath the cover of the cloak. Outside the cloak was a domain that Luonan was unable to touch and influence. Luonan suddenly understood. He was truly expanding his self-format to the real world through the soul cloak. It was used on his own body, and it was used on the vaster material plane. A mere tent was far inferior to the exemplary form of the logic world in terms of rigor and stability, when it came in contact with the scene of destruction. However, it was enough to form interference and obstruction for a structure that was inherently violent and turbulent. The water molecules gathered by the soul cloak converged at an even higher efficiency under the law and order of the visualization diagram in the short span of a single breath. They constructed a simple yet relatively complete defensive line. A long ripping sound rang out from within the building with a radius of 300 meters, at practically the same time. On the visible, conventional plane, a large expanse of smoke and mist rose. But in the microscopic world, it looked more like a pot of half-cooked porridge spilled all over the ground. As for the more profound plane of the polar domain, the formation of rules that descended down collided with Luonan's expanded visualization diagram. In that instant, the efficiency of interference with the material plane was cut by at least half. The desolate cavity went astray for a time, becoming completely unrecognizable. The problem was that the power of the scene of destruction was still extremely powerful. The desolate cavity only went astray for a short period of time. The strength of the soul cloak wasn't enough to truly withstand the impact when the energy it transformed was instinctively stimulated. The microscopic world surged once more in the blink of an eye, and the tense defensive line was immediately smashed to pieces. The impact of the backlash was directed straight at Luo Nan's brain, straight at the core structure of the external neuron. Boom. The oppressive sound wave manifested in the conventional region. The backlash of the scene of destruction didn't directly blast Luo Nan's brain to pieces. Instead, it smashed into an even vaster interference scene. This brand new scene possessed a vast space and leeway to interfere with and buffer the flow of energy within the scene of destruction. It was like pouring large amounts of ice water into a reactor. Or perhaps it should be said the other way around. It was like throwing the reactor into the vast and ice-cold deep sea. It used highly efficient condensation of water molecules as the material foundation. It caused an even greater amount of water vapor to pervade the air as it collided with the scene of destruction. Its astonishingly high heat capacity was no different from a wall of size for a method of energy transformation that used heat as its main component. Yes, Luo Nan's vast and majestic soul strength truly had the space to display itself with the soul cloak's conduction. In this moment, he practically moved the entire majestic iceberg ocean of his god gear down. It formed interference with the water molecules on the material plane, creating a scene of the deep sea. Of course, the deep sea diagram could also transform into a cloak. It soared and fluttered, drowning an even vaster heaven and earth. Luo Nan's breathing became hurried. However, he was able to split a bit of his mind at this time to pay attention to the changes in the outside world. He wanted to see what the effects of his move were in reality. The motorcycle gang had stopped, and the scale of the rat tide had clearly shrunk. This was excellent. Luo Nan's mind was delighted. This was because of the formation of the deep sea diagram, and because of the correct judgment of timing. If he were to confront the enemy head-on, he wouldn't have the qualifications to resist the motorcycle gang's overwhelming impact in the real world. And if he were to completely engage in a mental clash, the enemy could evade it. Only by placing the battlefield on the interference scene that was half real and half illusory, blocking the connection point of the enemy's mental and material interactions, effectively disrupting the flow of the enemy's operations. Only then would he be able to obtain such impressive results. Next, information flowed like water in the mission channel. In summary, President Ouyang had used the logic world to interfere from a distance, destroying the enemy's critical strike domain. Right now, the two sides were still in a stalemate. The staff members of the Psychic Wave Network maintenance team didn't have Luo Nan's complicated mental state. They had incomparable confidence in Ouyang Chun. So when they confirmed the scene of the rat tide's phantom distorting and collapsing on the monitoring screen, they relaxed one by one, even though the stalemate data was still quite low. At this time, a certain lab assistant picked up the thread of thought that had been severed. "Charlie, why are you here?" "The maintenance team." "You don't need to worry about that side." Charlie smiled as he turned to look at the control panel. The straight line distance between here and that side was only 12 meters, and there were practically no obstructions. Right now, Gao Meng was standing in front of the control panel, overseeing the overall situation in Ouyang Chen's place. As for Ouyang Chen himself, most of his mind was submerged into the psychic wave network. He was engaged in a domain interference confrontation with the powerful enemy several dozen kilometers away. An ideal opportunity. Charlie was like a normal patrolling staff member. He carried his toolbox and left the place where he had just been residing. He lowered his head slightly and approached the control panel without batting an eyelid. He had only taken 2 steps when the lab assistant behind him thought of something. He exerted force with his feet and used the usual swivel chair sliding technique of a technical geek. The man and the chair slid to Charlie's side. "Oh right, Charlie. You just so happen to be here. Can you help me take a look?" Holy crap. The eyes of the lab assistant nearly popped out. In just 2 steps, Charlie's relatively familiar face had already warped and shriveled. It was shriveled and dehydrated. The insides of his eyes had completely collapsed into 2 empty holes. Most of his bodily fluids had evaporated and transformed, forming a seemingly substantial red light that shuttled back and forth within the empty holes of his facial features. This scene was far too horrifying. The lab assistant's bottom line of mental endurance was instantly broken under the close proximity of Charlie. He let out a blood-curdling shriek and tumbled to the ground along with his chair. He nearly fainted from the fall. Charlie had no interest in the lab assistant who was screaming and groaning miserably by his feet. He bent his body slightly and suddenly exerted force. He charged in a straight line toward the control panel that was only 10 meters away. A sharp alarm rang out. The sudden appearance of an abnormal energy reaction in the core area had activated the laboratory's defense system. At this moment, Gao Meng, who was overseeing the entire situation in front of the control panel, shifted his gaze over and coincidentally met with the shriveled and withered face. The distance between them was already less than 5 meters. Gao Meng's pupils shrank slightly when he first saw an enemy with this appearance. However, his reaction was also extremely fast. Without moving his limbs, he only used his soul energy to stimulate the hexaear terminal and instantly activated emergency safety mode. The sound of an electric current rang out. A dark blue electric net instantly spread out around the control panel. Under the effect of a strong magnetic field, the high-voltage electric current formed a ring-shaped defense circle, isolating the inside from the outside. Even a rank B powerhouse would have to be prepared to turn into charcoal if they directly charged over. Chapter 488. Oh no! The next moment, the numbness from the ionization in the air disappeared. A huge gap appeared in the center of the electric net defense circle. The electric potential difference caused a high voltage to break through the air, forming a dazzling electric arc that bombarded the intruder's body. It was also at this moment that Gao Meng clearly saw the withered face revealing a satisfied smile. The intruder's body suddenly burst into flames, but the flames were a demonic dark red. In this strangely restrained and restrained flame, the figure's body instantly turned into ashes from the shoulder down, but the head and face remained intact. The red light from the facial orifices was so bright that it made one's scalp go numb. Gao Meng saw the red light shooting out from the withered head's eye sockets, brushing past his shoulder, and heading straight for Ouyang Chun, who was still in a meditative state. His scalp was about to explode, for rays of clear light rushed out from his body and formed a defensive barrier. He had indeed intercepted it, but the feeling of contact between the two parties made his heart sink. The seemingly fierce red light was almost like nothingness when touched. It had no impact at all. Gao Meng tried his best to detect the real situation. With his B-rank psychic ability, he could vaguely feel that there seemed to be a buzzing sound at a deeper level of interference from the red light. It was as if a giant crossbow had been set up with its tendons stretched open, accumulating an immeasurable amount of power, and aiming in Ouyang Chen's direction. The clear light barrier formed by Gao Meng's talismans not only did not obstruct the opponent, but it was like a ruler that helped the opponent to adjust his position in the depths of the void until he fired. At this moment, Gao Meng's mind was blank. He only felt that the clear light barrier he had set up was like 4 layers of thin gauze clouds that were instantly blown away without a trace. There was only an extremely tyrannical pure power that tore through the void and penetrated straight down. Perhaps it was only for 1,000th of a second, but an intense light burst out and a destructive power erupted in an instant. The sound of the explosion was like thunder, and the structure of the building where it was also collapsed. Gao Meng let out a muffled groan as his body was blown away by the impact of the storm. Along the way, he collided with many tables and chairs in the air. More than 100 protective talismans spontaneously ignited, but the sky was still dark, and he did not know where he was going. In the end, Gao Meng fell on the ruins of a console, bricks, and rebars. His whole body was in pain, and his ears were still ringing. He had lost his sense of balance. What was even more tragic was that his soul power was forcibly pushed out of the abyss by the powerful impact. It bounced out from the deep layer all the way until it reached the shallow layer closest to the material plane. Only then did it barely stabilize, but it was still a little blurry. However, he couldn't care less about these things. He gritted his teeth and struggled to get up. He wanted to see the consequences of the impact. However, because he had not completely digested the impact, he could not focus his vision for a moment. His vision swept across the surrounding area in a daze, and he was confused by the broken and messy buildings. After swaying a few times, he finally figured out the central area that had suffered the heaviest damage. He locked onto the decayed head that was still floating in midair. Extraordinary! The destructive effect on the material plane and the tyrannical impact on the mental plane combined to form a terrifying oppressive force. This was the level of an extraordinary. Of course, Gao Ming knew the despairing gap between an architect and a transcendent. But at this moment, there was no place for fear in the surging emotions in his heart. He just let out a howl and rushed up. However, before he could get up, he suddenly turned his head, turned his eyes and looked back and forth. Suddenly, he let out a laugh and couldn't help but laugh. Hee, where's everyone? Although 3 to 5 floors of the building had collapsed and become unrecognizable, this was the Shangding building without a doubt. The problem was, where were the permanent staff members here? Where were the engineers and technicians of the maintenance team on the 13th floor, which was full of laboratories? If it had really been bombarded, this place should have been a mess of casualties. However, other than the miserable ruins in him, there was not a single living thing around him. It was cold, bleak, eerie, and very strange. But Gao Ming liked it very much. He slapped his thigh and laughed completely. This was the logic world. This was clearly a spatial fault. Moreover, according to the stable structure of the void around him, he had not suffered a fatal impact. This proved that Ouyang Chen was still alive and well. He was able to maintain this magnificent and rigorous magical world. Ouyang, where are you? Where I am. Ouyang Chen's reply was timely. At the same time, his figure appeared in the void where only the withered head was left. He was still wearing the white coat he was used to wearing in the laboratory. His entire body was spotless and he looked rather calm. Gao Ming laughed and cursed. He followed the edge of the broken crack and with a few leaps, he returned to the 13th floor. He didn't know how the logic world was set up, nor did he know how Ouyang Chen was able to take care of both sides and complete such an extremely difficult technical move. It could be said that his heart was filled with question marks, but in the end he only spat. Are you filming? Why did you end up like this? Sorry. I kept trying to wrap something up, but I didn't succeed. Instead, I gave the other party a chance. In a moment of desperation, there was a problem with the Qi identification, and I got you involved. It's my fault. Gao Ming didn't really understand and could only stare at the first question. Which thing? Ouyang Chen didn't speak again. During this process, he didn't move his gaze. Gao Ming looked over and stared at the withered head. At this moment, light flowed and overlapped in Ouyang Chen's eyes. The effect of his extraordinary power directly caused the brightness and darkness of the void in front of him, the layers, the structure, and the dimensions to change. This caused the area where the withered head was to become transparent. The unrecognizable laboratory ruins turned into an illusory silhouette, including the withered head itself. However, as the transparency increased, a turbid mist-like shadow gradually appeared in the area where the floating head was. It was generally a dark gray color, and there was a faint smoke billowing at its edges. Gao Ming's gaze was unconsciously attracted to it. After looking for a long time, he felt that something could emerge from the irregular shadow at any time. Right now, the billowing smoke was perhaps the poisonous breath. Therefore, Gao Ming understood what Ouyang Chen meant when he said he didn't succeed. This shadow was clearly something that was independent of the laws of the logic world. It was like an eroded wound that destroyed the integrity of the logic world. Oh, could it be that the extraterrestrial ballista came from here? It feels a little familiar. I think it was that time at Frost River Reality? Gao Ming was talking about the battle with the Order of Justice at the Frost River Reality flagship store on Fudong Avenue last month. Although he had not personally participated in the battle, he had seen the relevant reports. The circle of shadows before him was vaguely similar to the giant shadow arm that had turned the logic world upside down. However, the one Wang had attracted at all costs was like a demon from beyond the heavens. It was valiant, berserk, and unparalleled. The shadow in front of him had only eroded an opening and built a channel to transmit and control power. It seemed to be lacking in terms of level. As he spoke, Gao Ming looked at the unrecognizable building. He had fallen all the way down just now. He knew that at least 4 or 5 floors had directly collapsed. Even if the building was created from the logic world, its structural strength would not be any less. A single strike was enough to destroy it to this extent. It was not much different from a tactical missile. Gao Meng could not help but think of the treacherous method that the other party had used to bombard him with. If this method could be used at will, then wouldn't all living things in the world, be they ordinary people or ability users, be they not at their mercy? Gao Meng felt a deep chill when he thought of this. At this time, Ouyang Chen's analysis of the shadow had come to an end. He changed his method and suddenly asked, "Who are you?" Gao Meng was slightly startled. A deep and magnetic voice spread through the void. A lucky explorer, a clumsy researcher, but also a qualified businessman. One could see that even though the withered head was only an outline under Ouyang Chen's analysis, it still made a clear and sinister smile. It was a stark contrast to the pure and deep voice that possessed an extremely professional style. It was this floating head in the shadow that became the medium for both parties to communicate. "My career has just started. I need to find a few investors to share the risks. I came uninvited today to recommend myself. I hope President Ouyang doesn't mind." Ouyang Chen calmly responded, "I mind very much." "Then I'm really sorry. I admit that today's exchange was a bit impromptu, but we can try to make it a real demonstration. President Ouyang is a veteran extraordinary. You have exceptional insight. In your opinion, do you think that the methods I brought out today have the qualifications to cooperate with the Xia City branch?" Gao Ming cursed in his heart. The other party really did put on a negotiating posture. Whether it's cloning technology or the plain function, this method of free communication in the logic realm, we can use it to discuss. I believe that the Xia City branch has enough capital to carry out an exchange. Ouyang Chen waited for him to finish speaking and asked, "How should I address you?" "Luo Yuan." Gao Ming noticed that this was a sensitive name that had just entered the database not too long ago. Ouyang Chen didn't seem to notice this. He immediately said, "Mr. Luo, do you know the name of the person you possess?" "I think it's Charlie." "Yes. He came here to apply for a job 12 years ago. He is now the father of 2 children. I've seen their children and have given one of them a name." "Oh, that's really unfortunate." "All right, I understand what President Ouyang means. The threshold of morality is always laughable and makes people feel helpless." Luo Yuan sighed, but he still wanted to fight. "As a whole, don't you think the Xia City branch needs to discuss? I think there are many people in Xia City who need to know the right to know. For example, Elder Yu Gang. He is old. Doesn't he want to prolong his life? Another example is Her Majesty Empress Wu. She has the heart of the world and is a hero of the present age. Doesn't she want to go a step further? There are also some youngsters who are quite ambitious. They urgently need the ability to match their ambition. If President Ouyang Gang is arbitrary." A cold light seeped out from Ouyang Chen's eyes behind his glasses. "I am the president, and an extraordinary. I can't be willful even at this point. What's the point?" "All right, I was thinking too much." The withered head opened and closed its mouth, transmitting Luo Yuan's deep and melodious laughter. "Perhaps President Ouyang and I are incompatible. Nothing will come of it if I stay here with you. Since this is the case, the intentions of other investors are very important. Therefore, I have another question. President Ouyang was able to turn over in time once. Can you turn over a second time?" Ouyang Chen stared at the shadow behind the head in silence. "I'll sell myself and boast for a moment. In some areas, my plane is more convenient than the president's psychic wave network. It's much more convenient." Amidst the loud laughter, the withered head that Luo Yuan controlled turned into smoke and dissipated without a trace. At the same time, the color of the shadow faded away. It gradually merged with the background of nothingness and returned to nothingness. The hole that probed into the logic world was closed by the other party. Ouyang Chen's eyes focused. He didn't say anything. He waved his hand and the void structure of the logic world disintegrated and returned to the plane of reality along with Gao Meng. In the blink of an eye, they were surrounded by the buzzing of the maintenance team's laboratory. At this time, the group of technicians were still in a daze. They were restless because of the emergency mode. When they saw Ouyang Chun and Gao Meng, who had disappeared for almost 2 minutes, appear again in their original positions, some people couldn't help but cheer. At this time, the ability users who stayed behind in the Shangding building had long since been alarmed. Elder Yu, who had been recuperating on the 12th floor, directly sent over a telepathic inquiry. But Ouyang Chun didn't have the time to explain. He just said to Gao Meng, "You take command." Then he entered a meditative state. Gao Meng was a bit confused, but he knew where he should put his effort. He immediately pressed the control panel and issued an order. Enter resource protection mode in all areas except the municipal square. Increase the interference rate of the Kuwang communications building with all your strength. Request the SCA to provide support to the energy center. No bypass them. Just use emergency authority. Hurry. These words were transmitted through telepathy. If it could be done directly, it was done at the first instance. At the same time, he received the latest data. Interference rate 20%. Model conversion ratio 35%. It was already amazing to be able to reach this level in the beginning. But after seeing Luo Yuan's inconceivable dimensional ballista, Gao Meng felt the corresponding numbers completely stagnate. Then he thought of something else. He directly transferred the command to the mission channel and sent an alert to the Kuwang communications building. Move irregularly. Don't stay where you are. Gao Meng really didn't know whether his judgment was right or wrong. But he knew very well that Luo Yuan's dimensional ballista cannon technique would be 100% certain death if Luo Nan and the others stayed where they were. Only when he sent the command did he discover that the other side had already begun to move. The mission channel still retained the warning and command from 5 seconds ago. Luo Nan. The enemy is making a big move. Hurry up and leave. Yuan. Don't scatter. Format space synchronization. Cat eyes bring the others. The group had already smashed through the side walls of the passageway and entered the office area of the building. The 3 deep blue walkers set up their formatting domain, wrapping Luo Nan and Cat Eyes within. They sped along the way, getting farther and farther away from the landing pad. Luo Nan ran madly the entire way. The structure of his body and soul was a bit shaken. The deep sea scene produced by interference rippled slightly, but it was nothing compared to the sudden surge of impact from the other side. He gasped for breath with some difficulty and locked onto the location of the motorcycle gang in the depths of the thick smoke. He had indeed noticed a few seconds ago that the enemy's operation method was a bit different from the previous assassin and pressure transfer network. A power that came from the depths of the polar domain, or even the distant deep space, directly interfered with this area. The motorcycle gang, who was previously an assassin, was now more like a ruler, a tool to lock onto and aim. However, Luo Nan's deep-sea interference scene continued to work, causing this area to become a relatively unfriendly area. It affected the accuracy of his positioning, forcing the other side to make a compromise. They did their best to allow the motorcycle gang to approach their location. Because of this, the motorcycle gang had changed from his previous stagnant state of a few dozen seconds ago. His figure sped forward like a violent storm, but the appearance of his sudden advance was truly bloody and terrifying. With every step he took, from the bottom to the top, including his legs, torso, and head, a part of his body would explode into a bloody mist. However, after the explosion, it would all be collected back into his damaged body. Then it would expand and explode even more areas. His body had been eroded before, but it was not as bitter and direct as it was now. In a mere 2 or 3 seconds, not a single piece of flesh remained intact on his entire body. Even his legs and feet were gone. He was not running. He was shuttling back and forth under the catalysis of the bloody mist. In the end, all of his body parts exploded cleanly into pieces, leaving only an outstretched arm. And this arm rapidly expanded as the bloody mist poured in. Dark green veins coiled around it, and it was as thick as a demon's claw. It tore through the air. Luo Nan's breathing became even more labored. From his perspective, this demon's claw was a murderous weapon that could chase after a soul and take away a life. It was also an aiming device for some even more terrifying weapon. It looked like one body, but it was actually two wheels. Compared to the bloody scene on the material plane, he was more worried about the incorporeal killing power behind the deep space. But the more realistic situation was that the demon's claw's assault was already enough to take their lives. The path of the demon's assault was an absolute straight line, and the surroundings of the claw surged with a fatal vortex of energy. The thin smoke in the office area dissipated in a single sweep before it could truly break through. The entire area seemed to have transformed into a blast furnace for smelting iron. Surging waves of heat swept across. It was enough to transform a person's body and soul as they approached. Crash! The floor was like a crispy biscuit. Half of it collapsed in an instant, and the tremors of Luo Nan's group brought the other half of the floor down. The 5 people fell at the same time. The kinetic energy of their running was transformed, and they went all the way down. And the terrifying demon's claw charged up diagonally. The timing was grasped to the point of despair. God and Si Guosheng put on their most professional performance at this time. They clearly knew that the attack from behind was terrifying, but they forcefully maneuvered without the slightest hesitation. Their bodies merged inwards to block the front of the demon's claw's assault. But they were still too slow. The demon's claw exploded apart bit by bit in the instant they merged inwards to block the attack. It was like a multi-stage rocket from the olden days. Every time a segment exploded, its speed would increase by a notch. By the time all the flesh and blood of the single protruding index finger had exploded, this broken finger, which was about the size of a traditional bullet, had already broken through 7 times the speed of sound. It was like an electromagnetic rifle had opened fire. It directly passed through the gap between the 2 deep blue walkers that had yet to close up. It also pierced through the formatted domain and penetrated inside. Ding! An arc of light suddenly flashed, revealing an inconceivable trajectory. It accurately blocked the path of the broken finger, and then powerful kinetic energy instantly transformed into an ear-piercing sonic boom. You're tuning in to the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.